just trying to keep you respectable.
Well, she's not doing a very good job.
Terrible.
Save the last American vagabond. Save the last American vagabond.
Here you go, lady. There's a quarter.
Thank you. Don't forget to take a flyer.
Where were we?
Right about here.
Jennifer!
It's my dad.
Right.
I've got to go.
I'll call you tonight.
I'll be at my grandma's. Here, let me give you the number. Bye.
That's the power of love. First time you feel it, it might make you sad. Next time you feel it, it might make you mad. But you'll be glad, baby, when you're found. That's the power that makes the world go round.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Thursday, June 13th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. Well, today we're going to get into something right out of the gate that a lot of you have been asking about and interested in hearing more details around. And I've been reluctant to get into it for obvious reasons around the legal conversation about whether or not, really the advisement is that if discussing some of these things before we end up getting into potential actual like court dates and what do you say, while you're seeing this go to court, that speaking about it beforehand could cause problems, I guess. It's easy to understand. But today, for those that still don't know what I'm talking about, we're going to discuss the legal attacks as I see it against the last American vagabond to start. And I use the word lawfare, which for those that don't know is like warfare, more so about international law and government use. But it's really only word that I think made sense with limited characters in the context of what we're talking about, and which is just, weaponizing the law. And it's an important conversation, I think, much bigger than just the last American vagabond. And I think it's worthy of discussion in a longer form. But for those that are, don't want to hear about that, which I understand, there's plenty, that aren't invested in that side of it or this platform in general, go get a snack. We'll be done with that in maybe 20 minutes to start the show. But we're also going to get into some important stuff today after we go through this and go through details that you guys can look at for yourselves, all public information. We're also going to talk today about the Sudan, which I discussed a couple shows ago. And Robert did an amazing article we put out today about, and this is not a new story. We've covered this many times. And still it is missed by a lot of people. I don't think necessarily intentionally. It's just sort of a buried story. And Robert did a lot of interesting connections on this last article. And this is more so about the U.S. and Israel exploitation of the area, as well as a lot of other locations we've talked about, and how that is either by design or basically just by, byproduct of their exploitation has caused this civil war that's going on now. Or really, to call it a civil war in the same context as some of these other, like Syria, it's not really accurate when you understand what's going on and what's being driven, who's funding different parts of this. But it's important to understand right now with millions of displaced people in Sudan, and while we're watching what's happening in Gaza, it's very important to understand that this is bigger than just this one location. And that's why this has become such an important exploratory area of new for a lot of people that have never really thought about this, talked about it. I'm going to show you a great clip today of a person who just kind of goes through her sort of awakening around this story. And it really has become something that just this, all the different analogies, the toothpaste in the bottle, like this thing is just opened up and there's really no putting this back away. But my point is it's just not this one location. And it's not even just Israel, obviously. Even just discussing Zionism as a focal point is not just about Israel, or as they would love to make you think, just about Jewish people. As we've talked about in the past, as Adam Green's interview, the majority of Zionists today appear to be Christians. And so it's important to think about the reality that this is a political ideology. and or our overlapping interview with David Icke and the conversation of Sabbateanism as the argued founding kind of element of Zionism before its current iteration. And the argument there is that this is kind of a foundational point between three ideologies: Nazism, communism, and Zionism. Now, that's not my opinion. That's a public discussed, theorized discussion. But it's interesting to think about when you talk about those specific ideologies. My point in all of this is to say that these are all things, Sabbateanism in particular, that are about sort of infiltrating politics and religion and using them. And so when you see how this has gone over the years, and just in the political angle, and now people are finally finding the courage, or at least just seeing it for the first time, to acknowledge the idea that Zionism, or for exact point, is the United States government, which obviously, as Biden is a proud Zionist, there's a Zionist overlap there, but you can decouple them if you'd like, that the U.S. government in its own right, Zionism and Israel, have been doing that, overthrowing countries, destabilization for their own interests at the expense of the people on the ground. This is not hard to understand. It only becomes contentious for some people when it overlaps with the Israel conversation. So we're going to talk about the Sudan in that conversation, as well as the bigger point about all of the things that are happening, but that the people of the Sudan are suffering in incredible ways. And it's been going on for a very long time. And we're also going to talk about Israel and the overlapping kind of ongoing discovery from not just the UN side, but what's the best way to put it? Information that's always been there, right in front of us. That's all, even from the UN, from human rights groups, that has been constantly put in front of people that just seems to get disregarded. I guess it overlaps with what I was just saying, that people have just didn't want to engage with that, or people are being influenced in many ways to ignore it, but new from February to now in this year, multiple new UN reports are just devastating their ongoing narratives. And then we're going to get into some other really hard discussions about what's actually happening, bombings in Al-Mawasi, and just a bunch of other aspects to that conversation that I won't open with right now, but just to get into are just, difficult. And I was going to say later, but just now that it popped in my head that, I realistically, just over the last couple of days, could show you endless images of babies blown apart, disgusting, horrible images of children missing limbs. And I mean, like, from the last couple of days, but I'm not going to. Maybe I should be. Maybe that's what we should be doing, but I just don't. Quite frankly, it's just difficult for me to do that. And I know it's hard to even continue to engage with, but I do argue it's important. But the reason I'm saying that is because we're not going to get into the graphic stuff today. We're going to get into the data, the information, and some of the videos and information around that. But just recognize how easy it is right now to see the horrific actions that are taking place because of what the U.S. and Israel are doing explicitly in Gaza. Now, leaving it right there, we're going to start with the Lawfare conversation. Now, I do think this is very important for people to understand. If you're interested just to know what TLAV is going through, and on top of everything else about the censorship, financial and otherwise, the suppression, just everything. And a lot of us are dealing with this. This is something a little bit different that also many people are dealing with, and not everybody has a platform to be able to highlight it. And so I've been, like I said earlier, kind of waffling on whether I wanted to call this out, just because, I was kind of hoping that this would in some way, as always, just hoping that it isn't dishonest, hoping that it isn't only about trying to destabilize and just bring this platform down, which is what it seems to feel like to me. And you guys can decide for yourselves. But anyway, the point is that I'm deciding to talk about it today because I want you guys to know what's going on. And I want you to know what I'm dealing with. And because I kind of came to a head with this today. And I'll show you what I mean about this, because at the point right now, I just literally, like a couple hours ago, spoke with my lawyer about this, and he's advising me that at this point, unless I want to, spend a lot of money to take this to court, that the logical thing to do is to try to settle with them. And his argument, though, being honest, is that that's probably not going to stop what's happening. They will come, but they'll find more things to sue you. That's what these groups are known for. One in particular, we're going to highlight today, just this kind of racket that it's like, as I use the term ambulance chasing, right? The idea of going after these things, and not to say that there's a dishonest, or rather an illegitimate reason to do so. Like, I'm going to highlight today that there's no disregarding the reality that the claim they're making about a copyrighted image is true. but I'll show you why I think this is completely illegitimate and why I have acted in good faith in everything that I've done around this. And nonetheless, it seems like it's weaponized. My point, though, is that these things are about the bulk, about sending out these letters as many times as possible to as many people as possible. And I'll show you what I think this is weaponized because of the locations. The two of them are coming from the same lawyer, the same group. And I think that's really interesting. Now, I'll explain it as we go through it so you can see this for yourselves. But I think it's important for the larger point as well, for what a lot of people in this independent media sphere are going through. And I think one thing that stands out to me is that this is about trying to box out anybody that's not inside these certain circles. You're just not allowed to be a part of it if you're not wealthy and backed by the right people. And what I was going to say before is that, speaking with my lawyer, he advised that, we should basically try to deal with this. And as he said, as I kind of rattled off before, is that that's ultimately going to continue, most likely, but there's just no way around it. And that's what I find. Even my lawyer said, you're kind of in a rock and a hard place here. So if I decide to try to fight this, we'll spend a lot of money, $50,000 plus to go just with my lawyer's fees to go to court and go through this whole process. And that doesn't mean you're going to win. I could realistically lose, have to pay my lawyer and their lawyer's fees and whatever they ask for, $30,000, obscene amounts of money for one picture. Or I could win and I'm still paying $50,000 to my lawyer and still maybe end up, but ultimately that's a win because we don't have to pay them. So I'm at a point now where I'm saying, I can't do that. I can't afford that. Okay. So I try to make a deal with them and then they demand $30,000 or, multiple lawsuits at the moment, adding up to more than that. I can't pay that. So then I'm stuck in a position where there's literally no choice. And I think that's a weaponized idea in general. Like, how is somebody as an individual supposed to fight this if you feel that you should? Maybe let's just even say they have a bogus claim. You potentially lose either way because you have to pay the lawyer to go through the process. And of the argument being that they know it's going to cost a lot of money for the average person, which most people can't do. So they send these out in the hopes that you settle. And it's like this constant racket game. And I think that's it's impossible. So I'm going to start with the first lawsuit here. And so this is all public. All this stuff is out there for you to see. It's all, you can look this up on websites. So I'm not going to go through this in depth. You can look at this for yourself. Seeley versus the Last American Vagabond, LLC. And I'm going to show you the details around this. Now, here is the group behind two of these lawsuits, seemingly disconnected, which doesn't really make sense to me. What that either means that they themselves have decided to look into what I'm doing and make money off of that, or whether justified or not, which seems interesting, targeted, or somebody else is putting them to do so. I don't know how it's possible that these two independent people go to the same log. It doesn't add up to me. That's the first part that stands out. Then you can look through this for yourself. This website, Sanders Law Group. Now, here is the first image that became the issue. This is an older article from 2021. The Great Narrative in the Metaverse, Part 2. Now, this is a panopticon. That was why we chose this, from Cuba. And I put the matrix thing over the top of that. Now, here's the point. For those that don't know, whether or not, whatever your thoughts, and I lean towards James Corbett's perspective on copyright in general, but the idea being that right now there's not some kind of one-stop shop to be able to go after or to figure out whether these things are copyrighted, Creative Commons, and so on. There's not some kind of like reverse image search to do that. I've looked, I've tried. If you know of one, please send me, it would help. But what I do is I look for images that apply, and I go to, like on Google or Brave, they have a little tab where you can look for Creative Commons. And that's usually what I try to do. Now, there is an overlap to fair use, right? Now, this wouldn't apply because we're not talking about panopticons in Cuba. But for instance, if you're talking about a news story and there's live shots and so on, there is an overlap of fair use there. So there's times where I use things that are directly from what's happening, and I argue that's fair use. Technically, that is. But at this kind of thing, I do my best to find things that are, I would think, taking my best effort, are in fact Creative Commons or not, copyrighted in other ways. So that being said, this is what was out there. After they sent their information, which again, the very first one here, actually, I got something in the mail. And I looked at this, and I even asked my lawyer and asked other people that have gone through this. And I said, is this legitimate? I mean, what is this? And because again, at this time, I'm thinking, well, I thought that was Creative Commons. And so he advised me, well, they dump these things on everybody. There's not, and so I kind of just put it away. I didn't think anything of it. I hear from so many people in this field that they get these things all the time. They disregard them and nothing ever happens because it's just about trying to get you to pay them for nothing. And again, I'm not even under the impression that I'm breaking the law at this point, or, copyright. And it's a harsh thing to say, breaking the law. But technically, if this is his image, that would be a copyright violation. One of the important parts of this is in the lawsuit side of this, or in court. One of the most important things they have to prove is that you did this intentionally. That's important. And my argument is, even if you know you didn't do it intentionally, and then when they showed you, you took it down, which I did, you have to spend $100,000 or however much it ends up costing to go to court to prove that. So if you're someone who does not have money, how is that supposed to be a fair legal process? This is a broken system in this regard. And I think this is angled towards stopping people like us. My point being is that if I didn't think it was, there's no action for me to take at this point. It doesn't end up with me losing lots of money, even if I technically win. That's really important to understand. So I changed this. And here's an important, very important thing that I want to show you. This is the updated version. This is not a copyrighted image, okay? But look at how close these images are. It's the exact same location. I mean, and here's what's even funnier. In engagements with my lawyer, they're arguing this hasn't been changed. They say that they think we just zoomed in on it, which makes my point, because look at this. This is the image I used. So when they said this and I discovered that they weren't lying or it wasn't something else, I took it down. I took this image and I added the matrix thing and I put it back up. Do it in good faith, trying to take action, now finally seeing that, or at least believing them that it was copyrighted. Now this is from Wikipedia Commons, or Wikimedia Commons. It's right here for you to check out. All the information is there. And this is a freely licensed image, okay? That's what this is. So you tell me how I'm supposed to know the difference between these images. My point being is that I did, in the original point, act in good faith and try to find something that I was under the impression was Creative Commons. And that's what I've now added. And even they're arguing that still hasn't changed, which literally makes my point. So at the end of the day, this is a very problematic situation if this gets even more used, against other, as well as the fact that I know there are gigantic platforms out there that make a hell of a lot more money that use things all the time. I know that for a fact. I'm not going to mention them because I don't want anybody else to have any negative effects, but I know that they don't have these problems. And it's likely because they know that they've got enough money to push back. Because at the end of the day, other than the weaponized angle that you might just be to try to take this platform down, from the law firm perspective, it is about bulk. It's about making money. But so if they know that you're going to win and ultimately still have to pay that money, but they don't get any money, so they pick their battles. So I think the targeting of TLAV is the idea that they know I'm in that position. So this is the first one, okay? So I find that so fascinating. This is an image that's so close, and this is Creative Commons. Again, I took it down after it was clear that this is what was really happening, okay? So that's still ongoing. Despite us telling them that, despite all my discussions, and despite the fact that I've proven to them that the image they're claiming was used amounts to like $50 when you break down the amount of money that was brought in during that time frame and the amount of views on that page. And yet they're asking for something like I think it was like $15,000. And that's oscillating between the numbers based on how long it takes and whether we're paying attorney fees. It's crazy to me. It's just weaponized. Here's the other one. Second one. McGlynn versus the Last American Vagabond, LLC. Now, again, you can look through these and it's just giving you the kind of timing breakdown of how my lawyers engage with them and so on. Guess what? It's also Sanders Law Group. I don't really know how that's not obvious. Now, this is a really interesting one, more so even. The article was Epstein autopsy finds evidence he may have been murdered. Now, this image is not the one in question. This image was one that I originally put on this. Now, I didn't even remember this until even today when I was putting this together. I put this image on there, which, by the way, was effing everywhere. That's not to say it's not copyrighted, but my point is I don't know how to find that out without doing... my point is that there is no real effort, way to find this out without this happening. And again, I took my best effort to try to find things that I thought were either fair use or under fair use or Creative Commons. But somebody reached out to me, and this was one of the earliest times I forgot about this. And they said, hey, you're using that inappropriately. And I said, okay. And I changed it. Now, at this time, it was like, whatever. I wanted something that was about Epstein in the picture, right? But I did act. So in good faith, I changed it right away to this image a long time ago. I believe these are the same people, quite frankly. Now, all this time later, that was back in 2020 or 2019. All this time later, that's when this came into play. I changed it again to this image, which is, again, I looked under Creative Commons like I do every time, and this is the one that popped up. So it's, again, you get the same point. Now, here's what's interesting about this is that all of this seems to be connected in a very, like, first of all, I think it is clearly all happening after all of this very intensive coverage around what's going on in Israel and Gaza. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily connected, but I'll show you why I think it does feel that way with this next point. But so now these are two different lawsuits coming from the same law firm, one about an Epstein image, one about a panopticon discussion about the metaverse and you know, Great Reset and all of that stuff. And I'd already been pushed to take this down. I updated it in good faith, and now we're there. Now, this image, by the way, you can find all over that. It's kind of irrelevant. But so here is, before we move to the third one, which I think kind of brings some of this together, you can find so many of these articles. It just search for the name, Sanders Law Group, and you'll find them all over the place. And that's not to say that they're, you know, you can decide for yourselves. Sanders Law Group and its infamous legal trolling scam. Read it for yourself. I mean, this is from 2023. It goes back a long time, and it's the same point. Basically, just dumping these on anybody in order to get them to pay that off to stop what's happening. In many cases, as they argue, not even legitimate arguments. Just similar looking images. My lawyer compared it to the idea of like when there was the, I forget the acronym, but you know, the railing to restaurants and ramps for people in wheelchairs. And there's legitimate reasons for those conversations, but there were people that obviously took aggressive advantage of that, who would go around, who would find somebody in a wheelchair and use them and go to building to building to building and then sue everybody who didn't have, and that was, they've written entire articles about that, right? And this is what he argues is the same thing. Now, here's what I find most interesting. Now, this technically has not become a lawsuit. We're in the talks of this, and they're threatening to officially declare this or file it if we do not pay them off, which to me just feels like a racket in and of itself. But this is from a group called Flash 90 LTD. You can look into that. And this is a group that is based in Jerusalem, Israel. And and here's just their website, all Israel content. And they are working through a group called Higbee and Associates. This is the information, so you can look at it for yourself. Here's the image that they had an issue with. And this is an article from 2023, why Israelis are revolting against Netanyahu and what it really means. We changed it to this image, which is, again, what I found under the same place I found this one, by the way, under the tab for Creative Commons, which apparently is not clear or not even accurate. But I don't know what else we're supposed to do as independent creators. So what I think is very interesting about this is the timing of it seems that I'm not trying to make this only about Israel. I just think the timing is very interesting. And I definitely believe that this has ramped up aggressively since that coverage. And I think this is really just about people highlighting uncomfortable truths. And I think there's a clear, desperate push to censor this kind of stuff coming from the people that are being called out around this, whether that's in the United States or Israel or anywhere else. So I find it interesting that we've got these two groups, or, you know, two of them, and this one, Sanders Law Group in New York, from two lawsuits, and then one coming from a location in Jerusalem. So all of that, guys, is to really highlight the fact that, you know, I don't know what else we're supposed to do to be able to stop that. If we act in good faith to try to use what we think is Creative Commons, and even to the point now where these things are coming, you know, I'm probably going to get more of them, probably after this even, that we then take them down when that happens. What is the average person supposed to do when you know that the only way to push back on something like that is to spend a lot of money that you don't have? And the primary point is they have to prove in the court that you did it intentionally, knowing it was licensed and didn't care. And since we know that's not true, the only solution is to spend money you don't have or accept the extortion side of it and pay them what they're asking, which is the lowest one in this conversation is about $3,500 for one image that I took down immediately after they sent this in. It hasn't even been filed yet. I just think this is a weaponized system. And even if you think that everything they're doing is correct, what is a person on our side of this supposed to do? I just think that's important to think about. Now, one thing I think is I wanted to highlight in here is that, you know, like I was kind of briefly saying, is I want to push this. I want more than anything in the world to take this to court, to make my case, and hope that we get a judge or somebody that recognizes this is just not right. But the problem is that I don't have that money. And I mean, after what's going on too, and thank God the Stripe thing was pulled back. Thank you to any news and decensored news and anybody else out there that was pushing them to stop that, because there's a small win, but these things are one after another. My whole career has been 2 steps forward, 1 step back, if not 2 and 2. It constantly happens. So I'm at a point now, as our conversation today, which I'm kind of need to decide by tomorrow, that either we're going to try to make the settlements happen, which I don't have the money. So all that will happen then is we agree to these settlements, and then it's a default or something, and then the case doesn't go away, because it only goes away once you pay and complete the payment. So there's really no solution. It's just nonstop detriment. And so my point is, I want to keep pushing on this. I want to fight this, but I don't have the resources to do it. So unless there's somebody out there that wants to sort of bankroll our fight against this in a legal sense, I guess we're going to be forced to settle, and then likely not be able to pay the exorbitant amount of money they're asking for. And so it will swing back around to another legal situation. And then we'll probably get, I mean, it seems like an escalating situation that I don't know how to get out of, unless there is somebody out there that wants to try to bankroll what we're doing. And I doubt that's going to happen. So I just want you guys to know what's going on, because I personally feel that this is targeted and weaponized, whether it's the groups themselves or somebody driving them or somebody within that. I don't really know, but you guys decide for yourselves. Now, if you want to continue to support this platform, I wanted to highlight some of these things for you that at the moment you currently still can do. Now, on our website itself, as you remember, there's donations up here. This is the main donate button to the donation portal on this platform, which uses the donation portal on the website, then goes through Stripe, which at the moment seems to still be sound. And they, so I argue that's at least one of the ones we should still keep using for the moment. And I think that's on the front page right here as well for the donation. We have our Give, Send, Go, which, again, I'm uncomfortable about, only because every other day I get another notification from somebody saying their recurring donation was removed. Haven't heard anything about the single donations, but I wonder whether that's even happening. And I don't even know if it's Give, Send, Go. I don't want to believe that, because they've been great. Might be the banks. I don't know. But either way, it's problematic. So that's there for you as well. But there are the cryptocurrency donations, which at the moment kind of feels like one of the best options, along with the direct donation mail-in, which I'll give you that in a second. I thought I should have added that. I thought I added that here. Let me see if I put that on the About Us. While that's loading, here's the Give, Send, Go, which again, just I just still am so blown away by the support we got off that in the first month. Just amazing. I guess not. So I'm gonna have to add that somewhere, but I'll try to. I think I'll show it to you. Here, I'll do this. Grab one of these real quick. And I'll just show you the address on here. So it's on the screen so people can see it before we go forward from one of the videos in the embeds. So here it is on Odyssey. And so I'll read it out for you guys as well. For those that don't know, beneath every video, all this stuff is down here. So the direct mail is 1113 Murfreesboro Road, Suite 106-146, Franklin, Tennessee 37064. We still get people mailing stuff in almost more than anything else right now, and that's a huge support for us. So if you want to mail something into us, whether it's just kind words or some donations, it goes directly there. That would be great. I also just started this. Somebody had recently highlighted, I think it was Max, said something about a spot fund, so I decided to start one of those too. Just why not, right? So here's another platform. Lofty goal, just threw it up there as high as possible. And, if you guys want to support us on here, and all I did was just take the campaign from Give, Send, Go and put it over here. No spot for the video. So there's another one for you as well. This is Spot Fund. Oh, it's a bit weird. It's not like a URL you can read off, but I'll include the link for you there. You can support us on our Subscribe Star. Here's the link for you. Or buy me a coffee, which still does at the moment seem to be, oops, that's not the right. I'll have to go back and put that in there. And then we have our Substack as well, which people are continuing to support. And there's another way to do that. And by the way, just on a side note, I completely dropped the ball on the founding meeting. There's just a lot of balls in the air for me right now, so I apologize about that. But I'm planning. I don't want to say the date now, just in case I have to move it, but I will be aiming for the end of the month. And I apologize, guys, for all of your amazing support. And those of you that have been missing out on that for the last so many months, it's completely on me. So I apologize about that, but it will be coming. But here's another way you could support us, as well as donating on these platforms themselves, through Rumble, through Locals, through Odyssey. They all have donation, platforms on there. You can give us, sort of super chats and so on. So all that aside, guys, thank you for, humoring me and bearing with me as we go through that. I genuinely think that's really important to understand, because it's not just about TLAV being attacked, right? I mean, we are seeing an unprecedented push to stop a lot of people who are finding their feet in this field because the completely collapsing corporate media. I mean, it's been propped up for a long time. And right now things are changing faster than ever. And I'm seeing this happen aggressively. If you know something happening and it's happening to somebody who doesn't have a large platform, send me information. I will scream at the top of my lungs about what's happening to them, because I think that's important, that we support each other and that we stand alongside each other, regardless of our political stances, as we're being suppressed for trying to say what we believe is right. Now, also, just going past that to start on one quick point before we get into, I believe, I have a Twitter point as well. I don't know if you've seen this, and this deserves a lot more attention, and I'm going to be talking about it more, but this has to do with and I've talked about this a lot, but Jimmy Dore recently posted, as well as Denny Rancourt, about the petrodollar conversation. And I'll first read what he says, and I'll tell you ultimately, why this is monumentally important, and it speaks to what I was just saying, that we are watching a very rapid change of the world. Everything, I mean, there are political dynamics, our foreign policy dynamics, our perceptions. I mean, everything is shifting. And I still argue that's not, it could be now being co-opted in a certain direction, but I don't argue that. I argue that wasn't by design. I argue that what Israel did changed everything with their reactive, clumsy effort, believing the world would toe the line like it always has. And they pushed it too far and they woke everybody up. Now, that's not to say that there's not immediate things happening right after that are manipulations and agendas. That's always happening. But just, I think, recognize how important that is. And this is one of those things. Now, one of the important discussions we'll talk about over the Sudan point is the normalization deals. That was a huge point around Saudi Arabia and Israel. And that got completely destroyed. It was already pretty much dissolving for many reasons, but there was still going back and forth. This, I think, put an end to that. The Israel, Gaza, and currently what's happening to them. And that's the petrodollar, Saudi Arabia. And if you don't understand, ultimately, very quickly, it simply is a U.S. manipulation from a long time ago about forcing every country in the world to have to exchange for oil in only the currency of the U.S. dollar, which allowed them unprecedented financial power over everybody. And that's why you still see them having the ability to apply financial sanctions unilaterally against whoever they want, which is technically illegal. The idea is there's supposed to be an international body that discusses UN and so on, and that's not what happens. Now, it's not just the United States. I think that's where it really kind of budded, but a lot of Russia and China, you've seen similar actions in that vein. But the U.S. government clearly leads that charge in casting financial sanctions against whoever it wants for whatever it wants, in many cases completely and entirely political. And I think pretty much always unjust, if you want my honest opinion. But so now this ultimately going away, and just the headline is Saudi Arabia's petrodollar exit, a global finance paradigm shift, is going to change a lot. Now, this doesn't even necessarily have to be in the interest of BRICS, which is one of the main comments people are putting out there. I agree that's most likely where this is going to end up, but who knows where this goes after this? And I think what's important to see is that this removes that power from a very clearly manipulative entity. And if that makes it into, here's what's funny is the idea of this multipolar conversation has become such a buzzword, like antithesis to what they argue should be happening from the right primarily, when yes, I agree. It's like the sustainability conversation, right? Where the word becomes bad because that's what they're calling it there, even though they're not technically working towards sustainability. The idea of a multipolar system, I don't understand why people find that to be so bad. I think that's, in fact, the opposite of globalization when you really break it down, having individual entities as opposed to one superpower guiding everything. But just like everything else, it is and will be manipulated by powers. Consider it like this, where you have the United States with their very clear two-party illusion. And then in the UK, you've got a different dynamic, a lot more parties, but it's the same thing if you speak to people there. They're all ultimately guiding in the same direction, that they don't really, it's still an illusion about what they're all, that they have much difference when it comes down to the outcome of policy. And I think that's the same idea. It's just because you could point to a multipolar scenario, if they're all ultimately still gassing and, towing the line for whether it's Israel or anything else, it's not much different. So we should be hoping, it comes down to you as an individual just being involved. And I don't mean voting. I mean, just being knowing what's going on, speaking your mind, taking action where you can, and not just going, okay, we got Trump in power, we'll sit back and let it happen. That kind of thing. That's what they want from you. My point being is that if we see this multipolar direction happening, and we try to shape it into what we want as the world, as opposed to letting the other superpowers make it to what they want, maybe there's a choice. But, I'm a pessimist for government. But Jimmy Dore says, what this means is the end of the U.S. as a superpower. I agree. And it's not just that. But it says this story should be the top story in every newscast, which is kind of crazy. Have you heard this on corporate media? Whether it's something they agree with or not, it's a huge shift, monumental. I haven't seen a single story about this, and I'm sure there's one or two. But it says, and front page headline of every newspaper. It should be. But it's not even being talked about, just like it wasn't talked about when the petrodollar was propping up the American economy. Every country in the world holds huge amounts of U.S. dollars because of the petrodollar. He says there's more $100 bills in Russia than there are in the United States. That was because of the petrodollar. This is all going away, and there is going to be a precipitous drop in the value of the dollar. That's almost near guaranteed. Now, that's one of the reasons why this is so problematic for individuals in this country. And one thing a lot of people have been saying about, just saying that's a problem for Americans. And your U.S. government is leveraging their interest against it. It ultimately is because it's about their interest at the expense of Americans, as almost everything else we've talked about. And it says this means soon the U.S. dollar will no longer be the reserve currency of the world, and that will spark a great depression inside the U.S. that we can't print money to fix. And that seems to be the most alarming situation, whatever your thoughts on this is. They can't just go back to doing what they're doing, right? I think that's problematic, and I think that's causing a lot of fear and irrational action. And it says all these kinds of calamities were supposed to happen under Trump, and I agree with that, actually. I think this was something that, whether it was something that was planned or not, I argue that Trump was sort of the person that a lot of this was supposed to happen around so they could blame it on Trump. Now, that's a pretty common opinion, but I do think that adds up. Who knows if it's actually what a lot, the majority have thought, but I think there was an element of that no matter what. And it says where our old friends stopped working with us and the world turned against the United States. Of course, this is all happening precisely because of the neocon policies of war and sanctions that Biden has implemented and media has cheered on. So don't miss neocon, Biden. The point is, it's all the same thing. He says we won't be told about this on the corporate media news anytime soon. And when it finally is discussed, they won't tell you the truth about it and certainly won't tell you what actually caused it to happen. It's now kind of too late for a revolution to fix this country. Well, I don't, whether it's a revolution of the mind, political, or marching through the streets, the point is I don't know if that's the case. I don't believe that this is some kind of too late, we lost it. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to have some hard times, which is kind of guaranteed with what our government's put us into, not even just this one point. But I argue it's important that we don't just kind of wash our hands of this. That was my point before about whether it's BRICS or anything else. It's on us as individuals to act in the interest of what we should be doing, not just let one person you voted for take all the weight for that, which is not even actually how that works. Let me close some of these real quick. So the other one is from Danny Rancor, who highlights the same point. And what he says is it's no longer a petrodollar. It's now a protection racket dollar by imposing arms sales on client states. Now, this is an important point to think about, is after this goes away, the U.S. isn't going to just let that happen. They're going to strong arm as much as they can to maintain what they need. So that's what they are. And that's not because it should be or it always was, maybe. But my point is it's clear to see now that this is, again, referencing Whitney's very good work over that kind of overlap. These are gangsters. I mean, everything that they do is muscle and strong arming and threats and, under some kind of label of democracy or freedom. It's just not even the reality. But it says the USA gang is losing territory. It will continue to strangle Europe, Japan, Australia, and Canada. Now, to be clear, that's not an attack on the country, as much as people in the two-party illusion love to make that case because they want to keep the status quo for their interests. It's about the government or the people pretending to be your government. The country is you. The country is not the government. The government is not the country. Those are two separate things. The government are simply people of the country who are supposed to be acting in the interest of the country. They're not. So make sure we remember that. The government doesn't give you rights. They simply are supposed to be upholding their God-given rights outlined in the Constitution. They can't take them away either. It's not how it works. But they've loved to play that game over the years. Sort of that statement, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist, right? Classic usual suspects line. Same kind of idea. They've created the situation where they've convinced Americans that they're the ones doling out your rights, that they have control. It's just not the case. In the Constitution, it says that we have the ability to alter or abolish it should we see the need. Think that would be allowed today? That shows you something very important. Now, on Twitter, which overlaps with the Israel conversation, but we're going to go to the Sudan after this, Elon Musk said something on June 10th. He says, if Apple integrates OpenAI at the OS level, which is terrifying to me, but they're all doing it, including Twitter and everything else, Apple devices will be banned by his companies. That's what he says. This is an unacceptable security violation, which is really interesting to me because I agree. All of these are problematic. But the obvious point that Censored Man has just been ringing the bell of it good for him. He says this is also a security violation, Elon Musk, a security violation for the users of your platform, which is the reality that AutoTix, I believe, is, if that's pronounced properly or not, the Israeli company that they're using for verification, which Censored Man has done an amazing job breaking down how they're taking, they have the right for your biometrics, your information. And don't forget, the biometric aspect is listed in there. Whether or not that's what Twitter says they're taking, they state that's part of it and that they can retain this information. This is, how do we not think that's going to overlap as you see Israel's government taking aggressive action in this country against people supporting Palestine? Now, suddenly they're the ones dictating through this company. That's very alarming. And as he writes, Dr. Eli David, of course, one of these classic propagandists for Israel, is connected to this platform. He says, or AutoTix, it's the CEO of AutoTix. It says, here's something bizarre I stumbled upon. Now, not that he is the CEO, but it's connected to it. The current CEO of AutoTix, the company that has deep ties to Israel intelligence and is used by X to verify its users' IDs, is a man named Dan Yerushalmi. Before becoming CEO of this company, he served as CRO and chief customer officer for the company called Checkpoint Software. It's an American-Israeli cybersecurity company. Now, Whitney has been constantly talking about this dangerous overlap and how explicitly stated almost anyone to look, they're acting in the interest, whether or not they're currently part of these, Unit 8200 security aspects, which is sort of like saying you're former CIA. I don't believe that's even the case, but even they state that they're acting in the interests of Israel. It's very clear. So when we talk about people like Brian Mast, who are part of the IDF as a congressman, as the person running against him right now is arguing that's a huge, huge security risk, because it is. It's not about Jewish people. It's not even about Israelis. It's about the idea of a foreign government having infiltration. I just had this wild back and forth with somebody I previously respected from COVID-19 conversation, not even worth getting into, but just blew my mind that the idea that we're talking about Congress being occupied, it's just because that overlaps with this classic Zog conversation, that's exactly what we're talking about. But the weaponization of the Zionist occupied government, how it's been labeled this classic anti-Semitic trope. It's like, okay, that what they're thinking about is not even what I'm saying, just because the words are the same. There are people that have used that to say Jews are running the world and so on, which I don't agree with. I agree Zionists is a very clear part of this. And yes, there's a huge overlap there, but they're not the same thing. Plenty of Jews will tell you that today. But because they can't get past that block, the point is, how are we actually disregarding the obvious, verifiable, touted, praised, shoved in your face that AIPAC and lobbying groups are wildly funding every leader across the board in our Congress. And almost, I think it was about 77% of Congress get funding from AIPAC. I don't quote me the exact number, but 70 something. I did the math live on the show last time. And then you've got Israel's influence directly. That's undeniably obvious. If that was the UK, I would be equally concerned. The fact that we can't acknowledge that problematic issue, while plenty of people call it out, plenty of people in government do, and just because of this other conversation, we just go, you're racist? How is any objective person with any intelligence acting like that? It actually blows my mind. So the point back to this is using an American-Israeli cybersecurity company is a problem for that very reason. The founder served in the Israeli intelligence unit, Unit 8200. It's also rumored to be collaborating extensively with the Israeli government and intelligence right now. We have evidence of this happening on at least one occasion when the company worked with the Israeli government to form a consortium, IC3, which was established by Israel's Ministry of Economy to address national cyber needs. We've talked about things like Carbine 911, which is a company that relays 911 calls in the United States that's run by similar entities. I just don't know. That is a huge problem. Whether or not you think they have designs to do something or not, that's clearly a security risk. For people that always scream about national security, it's amazing what they pretend they don't see when it comes to Israel. But he goes back to Dan. Dan was also the president of a business manager of EMEA for Amdocs. He says, the company that was investigated by the United States as early as the 2000s for being used by Israel to eavesdrop on the United States government communications. And I think somebody even posted this down here, right there. It's just amazing the things people are ignoring. So he simply goes, what about this? While you're highlighting Apple simply integrating an open AI system, which is I'm concerned about. But between the two, the Twitter side of this is far, far, far more alarming. But again, they're both very concerning to me. I think both of those are problems. So Tiberius replied to Elon Musk saying this, and he says again, Apple integrating is a problem, he said, security violation, and that they'll ban these in all their companies, which is actually really crazy to think about because that's a huge move. Elon is wildly influential, has a lot of companies with a lot of pull and a lot of reach. For him to do that would be a big deal. Tiberius says the guy who is forcing everyone on Twitter who is verified to submit their identity, and not even just verified anymore, it's everybody, but there's more aspects of it. And by the way, I still have yet to have had to do anything more than the original. I don't know whether the time has passed or not, but I get the sense that's coming as well. And I'm not going to do anything, nothing new, nothing other than what's already been there this whole time. But he says, who are using this company to verify details to an Israeli company while Israel's committing war crimes and genocide. Nobody should be taking this lying, hypocritical POS seriously, he says. Now, Censored Man has been following up on this. This one was on the 11th. And he simply highlights this, Israel's CHEQ to help Musk battle bots on X. Oh, really? The bots that are worse than they've ever been, and anyone can see that on this platform right now? He says X signed an agreement with an Israeli company to stop the bots that are actively pushing Israeli propaganda talking points. Does that make sense? And on the 10th, he simply said, so I just found an Israeli bot farm on X. Nearly all the replies are written in the same format. All liked tweets are replies from other bots. All replies spew Zionist talking points. Elon Musk, Israel's literally botting your platform in real time. You think he doesn't know that? I mean, we've all seen this. I mean, especially you go in your DMs. It's like the same thing for everybody. Hey, my sister saw your account, and I wanted to reach out. It's like the same thing. 0 followers, some kind of foreign-looking picture. So this is interesting, and it overlaps with the like situation we'll touch on in the end. But he says on the 11th, wow, it sure is comforting to know that Israel's bot farms on X are being battled by, wait for it, members of the Israeli intelligence. Ain't that amazing? He says, thanks, and this is the official 1984 account for making him aware of this great news. ID verification and bots, crazy. It gets worse. So he follows up and he says, the Israeli chokehold on X is worse. Again, tagging the one I just read, and this was posted on the 12th, and saying Benjamin Netanyahu himself asked Elon Musk to have a meeting with the CEO of the CHEQ company, which was the one they're using to supposedly battle bots. He says in the meeting they discussed Palestine, Israel, anti-Semitism, misinformation, bots on X. Really? What does any of that have to do with using this to stop bots? Obviously you see that. There's something else going on there. It's about using this to stop what they argue should be, and we're watching this happen. Censorship of predominantly pro-Palestine content. He says, let me be clear. We are being told to give our government-issued IDs and biometric data to Autotix, an Israeli company with deep ties to Israeli intelligence, in return for monetization, which nobody should do. There's a growing number of Israeli bots on X, which the Israeli government issued themselves. He says, I found one bot farm himself. He says, the company meant to be battling bots on X is also an Israeli company. The CEO of an Israeli company is former Israeli intelligence who got a meeting with Elon Musk after Netanyahu himself requested it. The Israeli chokehold on X is absolutely unbelievable. And you got people, the ones you can imagine, with their, with their name Tucker on X, Alex on X, just right on their logos these days, ignoring all of this. I find that pretty concerning. Now he follows up. This one's on the 13th. He says, FYI, the only reason he was able to discover the Israeli bot farm was due to public likes. Mandatory hidden likes instantly hides this bot farm. And guess what? I think it was either yesterday or today that just kicked in. So now apparently you can't see what people are liking. Of course, that could just be a coincidence, but interesting how that new change hides what Censored Man was able to see. It made you able to identify where the bots were. And now that function has been removed. Anybody confused by that? NT-Censored News tagged this and simply said, X just can't seem to figure out how to stop these dastardly bots without the help of a company whose founder and CEO is a veteran of the Israeli military security and intelligence units. They're just so sophisticated and hard to spot. What else is X supposed to do? They're being facetious. They're joking. Look, that's my point. Hello, my sister saw your profile. Hello, my sister saw... Right now, I should have taken a picture. I've got 14 of them right now. Every day they happen. By the way, I'm also getting like 15 a day of those random messages like I showed you going, hey, this is Trump. You should vote for me. Or, hey, the one I got today just recently said, hey, the Great Reset's a problem. Learn why. And it's leaning you into Trump and voting stuff. They're using talking points like that. They don't believe it. I mean, they're actively a part of this stuff, guys. How amazing is that? Now here, oh, by the way, here's the article I did on this, or the show, from December 2023. As usual, seeing this stuff right away. Israeli Unit 8200 Tide Company runs Twitter verification. But make sure you're following Censored Man because he's way past what we covered on this article. This is just kind of the early discussion and my thoughts on what would that in exactly where we are now. And here's Elon on the 12th saying, massive increase in likes after they were made private. Well, what do you know? The bots went crazy, right? Do you really believe anybody was suddenly liking more or not because they thought people were paying attention? I mean, I'm sure somebody, but I mean, I don't know. At least from my perspective, I don't think people actually are worried that much about liking and like. I mean, I like things just to make sure I can have them in that tab so I can find them later. And I mean, I like and retweet everything, even the terrible stuff, because of that same point. I don't. The like doesn't represent. I think this is fantastic, right? The same way people say retweet does not equal endorsement. Do we really have to pretend that's the way people look at this? We all know that's not the case these days. I think this is very obvious. You can decide for yourself. And one last point. Well, before we say this, I just really want to make sure, where this is going with the Twitter files debacle, the fact that they never revealed the source material. I mean, they are socially engineering on overdrive. We need to see that. And people in the two-party illusion who are acting like this isn't happening, actively ignoring what Israel's doing, there's a problem there. There's a huge gap, and it's highlighting what I think is like how the likes he showed you were identifying the bots. This situation and what we just discussed is like a sore thumb, making these liars stick out. The ones that used COVID-19 to act like they were on the right side of things. There's a lot of them who sidled up next to a lot of content that they, were like, yes, fight these bad shots. And now suddenly they're lockstep with the agenda. They do the same thing. And right now, I argue, even independent or corporate media is doing a similar thing with Israel, starting to try to gain your support back by highlighting some of the truth. It's a problem. Now, last point on this, Elon says, yeah, same point. BX called this out. I showed you before. It's all these like, yeah, I agree. Correct. Like these one-word answers within like half a second of each other. I think he's using bots himself. Rabbit Hole says the term far right has become so loosely applied that it's effectively useless in sniffing out genuine cases of extremism and more often used to slander reasonable people. 100%. And this is not just with the term far right. There's a lot of stuff going on around this, like where they are using it in a dishonest way, so it makes the word meaningless. And so right now, it's very obvious that that's happening all over the world, and it's weaponized very clearly, literally while we're watching one of the most far-right governments in the world in Israel. But here's my point. I said, now let's see if we can apply that logic just one small step further in the same exact direction and address the exact same situation with the use of the term anti-Semitic. Test and objectivity, zero engagement. So somebody who can go, yeah, MAGA and far right, yeah, they're lying, and then you just ignore the same thing happening with anti-Semitic and Israel. I mean, even while those same people, as I've said many times, 30 seconds ago were being called Nazis, anti-Semites because they were in the trucker convoy, because they wore a red hat. Now those same people are screaming everyone's anti-Semitic and they should be shut down and censored. How do they not see that? Again, and I've made this clear, I don't think it's even the majority of the conservative, entities out there. I think it's the Republican two-party illusion manipulators. I honestly think, as I thought with COVID, there's a lot more people that are at least aware of this, who, probably still in many ways side with Israel, but are at least able to see how the manipulations are being played out and are open-minded enough to consider what we're saying. I think there's a lot out there. Now, on that note, let's talk about a very important discussion around one of many locations that are being manipulated by the U.S. and Israel and, Britain and other groups that are clearly playing their role as well, but the focal point being on the U.S. and Israel. And it's just the world around, guys. I mean, it's so obvious to see. And that has nothing to do in this case or, with any one religion, ethnicity. This is about a political ideology that is insidious. And really, it's becoming second by second more transparently obvious to individual random people that have never thought about this before just because it's hard to ignore what's going on. And so then suddenly this pops up in their feed and they go, oh, okay, well, Overton Window is a different place. Let's consider this. They are killing children, right? And at the same time, okay, well, the U.S. is weird, in their mind, right? They haven't seen this before. And well, weirdly, the U.S. is not only supporting the genocide, they're arming them. They're saying it's okay. Okay, so let me consider what you're saying about what they did in Iraq. Let me consider what you're saying about the regime changes everywhere else in the world. That's happening right now. And that is terrifying to them as they lose the petrodollar control, as they lose their influence. Guys, these are cornered animals. I guarantee you there's concern for them. And this is a great article from Robert today. How Sudan's civil war was aided by the U.S.'s Israel normalization agenda. Now, this is about the U.S. coercing, manipulating countries into normalizing with Israel. And I've talked about this a lot. This has nothing to do with whether these countries are suddenly changing what they do. It's the Sudan is the best example. We made this point many times, where they were labeled as a state sponsor of terrorism. And even then, you could show that these groups were still being backed by the same entities we're talking about. And then they pushed normalization. And they said, look, if you normalize with Israel, we'll take you off that list. And it's an objective reality. You could look and see that they were still the exact same problems they pointed at when they said they were terrorists. So how does that make sense? Well, it only makes sense if they, one, don't care about terrorism at all, and it was just a coercive measure to push them to support Israel, or that they were never terrorists, and they lied about that to keep them in that position to force them to deal with Israel. It's just the only way you could look at that. So let's read through this and understand this is not just this one location. And while there are millions, I think over 10 million arguably displaced, a lot of people suffering for a long time. The U.S. government recently condemned an attack that murdered over 100 civilians in the Wad al-Nura area of Sudan, committed by the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, who are warring with Sudanese military. Yet, Washington's projected outrage over the ongoing atrocities committed in the North African nation are tantamount to a cover-up of the U.S. government's role in fueling the ongoing conflict, due in large part to the regional agenda to normalize ties between Arab states and Israel. Now, this is, I go over most of it, I think, but as always, read the whole thing for yourself. The ongoing conflict in Sudan was sparked following an order given in 2023 by the de facto Sudanese leader and head of its military, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, to launch airstrikes on positions of the Rapid Support Forces, led by the notoriously brutal, we'll just say Hamedi. His name is Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, and just Hamedi is what he is generally called. Now, in 2023, this happened. And we shouldn't forget that in 2023, Robert wrote the article, TLAV put the article out, the U.S. is heavily involved in Sudan's renewed turmoil. Western media omits this. So recognizing at the time when that happened, they were already immersed in this conversation. And it goes back a lot further than that. So as they're condemning these things, realize that the Israeli government is explicitly supporting the RSF. Now it says, however, as noted by the Foreign Policy magazine, not only are U.S. policies largely responsible, and this is foreign policy, by the way, not some fringe platform, for the turmoil. Not only are U.S. policies largely responsible for the turmoil we see today in Sudan, but the conflict was quite predictable as well, which is an important point. The question then stands, if this is predictable, if it was clearly seen, then why would the U.S. government allow it to happen and encourage steps to be taken by the ruling authorities that worsened tensions over the span of years? Obviously, because it benefits them. The point is that was directly at the expense of everything they otherwise claim they're trying to achieve. Stability, peace. The people of the Sudan suffered because of this and everything they've been doing. Again, trust me, they see this, just like a lot of these countries right now. It says, on this under U.S.-Israeli normalization agenda. Now, all that is about the Abraham Accords conversation and forcing countries to normalize relations, Arab countries with Israel, while they are actively calling them terrorists and seeing them, it's like with Egypt, they got that to happen, but the people of Egypt still aggressively do not want that. They just forced it to their government, which shows you this, democracy game they play is ridiculous. And Sisi himself was put in power by the same regime change tactics. Now it says, although Washington is no longer capable of simply supplanting its military in any country it chooses, overthrowing and reshaping nations in this manner, it still does hold economic blackmail as a major card with which to control poorer nations. That might be changing rapidly with the loss of the petrodollar. But right now, they're still doing this. They're not going to stop regardless. This strategy is both a lot less costly than direct wars of aggression and enables destabilization to take place without the international spotlight being fixated on their role, which is why you've seen a lot of the sanctions element before, the past just was, before the internet, let's say, just military. But it says, as is the case right now with the U.S. support for the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Now, Israel, on the other hand, sought to expand its influence and economy and to force itself onto areas of the world where the majority of the population rejects them, but also where unelected autocrats are purchasable for the right price. So this is the point we make a lot about why they've funded the worst elements of exactly what they claim they're fighting, whether it's Hamas or anything else, because the ones they can't just buy don't want to just bend over for what they want, because these people are not interested in some kind of mutually beneficial agreement. They want control. So they fund the worst, the bad ones, the people that are murdering for no reason, the people that are willing to do anything for what they're paying them. And they're also hard to control for that same reason. But the moderate, middle, or further back, they don't want to just bow, and that's what so they go to the really extreme, like the Azov movement, like the RSF. Now, it says, in the case of Sudan, an opportunity presented itself in 2019 when a popular revolt pressured the nation's military into overthrowing its longtime dictator, Omar al-Bashir. Bashir was also closely tied with the Muslim Brotherhood movement, and for his stances that were hostile to Israel and the West's liberal agenda, the United States had enforced heavy sanctions that crippled the nation's economy and led to a regime that grew towards greater corruption and repressive measures against its people, directly as a byproduct of what they did. It says this formed what has been actually called the Sudanese deep state, comprised of corrupt army officials and state-aligned militia leaders who work for their own selfish benefits and often at the expense of innocent civilians. So this is important to realize that their actions drove this into reality. Now, they then continued to side with whatever element was best in their interest, and since then, well before that, it was also destabilized and people were suffering, but this has gotten worse since then. And they act like they're fighting for everything that they're causing, or against everything they're causing. By seizing control of the state, Sudan's army forces provided the United States and Israel with the cover to work with the same corrupt officials that they had moments ago been sanctioning and condemning for decades. That's very easy to see, just like anything else we've talked about, or like Israel funding Hamas, then pretending they're fighting them. These people are it's all a game. Wag the dog. It's a game. When they're suddenly working with the people, or like how about the Taliban in Afghanistan? There's so many examples. They claim that the entire reason that started was the Taliban. 20 years later, they're making, or well before that, they were making deals with them. The point was, it was never really even about them. It's about defraying the cost for the minerals and that's what they called it, the minerals in the mountains, the opium, the different control, a million different things, geostrategic control. It says, while they knew that the ousting of President Bashir didn't suddenly transform the Sudanese state, and that in fact only made it more chaotic by removing the one man who kept the tyranny underneath him bottled in. Not to say that he was a good person or doing right by them, but he was able to keep the corruption under control. It says the U.S.-Israeli alliance, and again, even then you could argue that they were working through him for a long time as well, just like you talk about with, Osama bin Laden or Saddam Hussein, where they were an ally up until they were no longer useful. But it says and that in fact only made it more chaotic. And the U.S.-Israeli alliance wasn't going to turn its back on this opportunity to progress the, quote, normalization agenda. It's not what it's really about. And really, again, the Sudan part is important to think about. It's not about whether they're doing the right thing or changing their actions. It's as long as they're willing to play ball. I mean, look at Saudi Arabia. Maybe now it's going to change because of what just happened, but the point is they're one of the most authoritarian entities And, and talking about Arab overlap and everything. I mean, clearly they fit all those categories, but except they don't worry about them. They're a good ally because they're an ally, because they work with the United States. Even though their Wahhabi extremism is the foundation for all the things they claim they're fighting. It's absurd. And this stuff is so obvious to see. Now, it says, when it comes to former U.S. President Donald Trump's series of Israeli-Arab normalization deals, dubbed the Abraham Accords, the wave of agreements was clearly being led by the UAE that had maintained clandestine relations with Israel for decades prior. Now, under why are Israelis seeking a foothold in Sudan? It says, one of the primary reasons behind the push for normalization of ties between Tel Aviv and Sudan is the strategic importance of establishing a stronghold in the area. It would give Israel a foothold in the Red Sea, which is vital for international shipping, as we have recently seen in the case of Yemeni-imposed blockades on the ships heading to Israel-controlled ports of Eilat. I've talked about the similar thing with the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the idea of the Strait of Hormuz and in Iran. They've been trying to find a way to, I argue for a long time, many other reasons as well, to control one of these other waterways, because they always knew Iran could shut down the Strait of Hormuz in the event of their eventual attack on them, which has been long coming. Now, it says Israel also plans to begin IT and agricultural projects in the Sudan, which will not benefit the people, just like the things they grow in stolen Palestinian land do not benefit the Palestinians. Now, it says the Israelis, along with their Emirati partners from the UAE, currently illegally occupy Yemen's Socotra Island. Nothing new there. Another Israeli illegal occupation. Why don't we talk about that? Why doesn't anybody scream about that? Oh, because Yemen bad guys, I guess? Or, we just talk about it? It's incredible. There's so many. This is the problem with the idea that the rules-based international order, it's all about them being able to break whatever rules they want while forcing what they claim are the rules on anybody else. They're illegally occupying the area, as well as a whole area within Yemen itself, or places of Syria, places of Lebanon, all of Palestine, same old thing. And I'm talking about a mix of the U.S. and Israel right there. But it goes on to say, or wait, I just lost my spot. There it is. It says, and so basically the island of Socotra, and it says around which 9% of the world's annual global petroleum supply passes. It says this island is also a strategic stronghold for the UAE-Israeli alliance, as it is situated close to the Gulf of Aden, the Horn of Africa, and the Indian Ocean, demonstrating the intent of Tel Aviv and Abu Dhabi to establish their control in the region. According to Israel Hayom, the country's most widely read newspaper, Tel Aviv views Sudan a staging ground en route into Africa, and also key to solving the ongoing issue of some 150,000 African migrants, which had been at the center of Israel politics for some time. The problem being they don't want them, is the point. And it says, and again, I've talked about this in the conversation of Ethiopian Jews. It doesn't matter whether you're Jewish or not. It matters whether they're Zionist. And there are plenty of Jews, Orthodox and otherwise, in that country that will tell you that they get beat up and attacked because they stand against Zionism, or because they're just Ethiopian. And I just talked about this. Haaretz covered this. And the headline, I think, was they're second-class citizens. It's an apartheid state, guys. That's the obvious reality, as every leading human rights group in the world will tell you and have written about many times. But it says, where we leave off, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has repeatedly been accused of racism, not hard to wrap your mind around that, and stirring anti-refugee sentiments, which, by the way, was a major element in the Rwanda genocide. We covered that explicitly in the discussion about the Rwanda genocide, which one of the things that even Haaretz was covering was before, during, the Israeli government was pushing them to say, the people, the other side, they're a problem, right? They're not like you. Just like what we're dealing with the Palestinians. That's what was happening. And they're the ones that armed them with Uzis and drove before, during, and after Israel was explicitly involved in the Rwanda genocide, as well as Bosnia and plenty of others. It's not hard to look up if you're just objective and care to read other than what, they're screaming you should look at. And I'm talking about Haaretz leading mainstream articles around the world, human rights groups. But because they scream you're racist, people just tend to shy away from it, but that's going away. It says even threatening to deport African migrants. Establishing relations with the Sudan could lead to a solution for Israel's alleged, quote, African problem, which the Jewish supremacist regime and much of its population disapproves of due to African migrants posing a perceived threat to the Jewish majority demographic agenda, which again is nothing if not apartheid, if not bigotry, if not racism. And again, for those that might have just balked at saying Jewish supremacy, let's make sure we recognize that B'Tselem, who is the leading Israeli human rights group in the world, says this: apartheid, a regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. This is apartheid. So quoting what the Israeli platform says, make sure you understand these things are not contentious, or they shouldn't be. It's obvious to see that that is how they view this. And I'm not talking about every Jew or every Israeli, but I'm talking about the Zionist government. Now, under Why Help Stir Civil War, it says, it was clear from the beginning that the United States was never willing to encourage Sudan to take steps that would usher in a representative democracy that represents its people. They don't want that. They want some kind of authoritarian regime that pretends to be democracy so they can get what they want from it and not have to worry about dealing with somebody that might eventually balk at their crimes. It says Israel immediately jumped in to offer its services, of course, as a mediator between both the Sudanese military and the Rapid Support Forces, while boasting its ties to both sides, which was portrayed in the Western media as if Tel Aviv just wanted to play a stabilizing role in the country. Israel's foreign ministry initially joined Egypt in backing Sudan's de facto leader, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, while the Mossad was clearly and verifiably supporting the RSF. You can find this written in, and all the links are in here, you just can't see it, in corporate media, in Haaretz, and places like Israeli media. It says Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, or Hamedi, is amongst the richest billionaires in Sudan. Remember, he is the leader of the RSF. He owns a large portion of the nation's gold mines and maintains perhaps the worst human rights record in the country. Nothing surprising there, as they fund the Arab movement and other wildly and obviously extreme elements. Now, the gold mine is an important overlap we won't get into, but you can read about that in this article. He wrote about it. I think it was this one, realizing that there's a whole overlap there that also involves the United States. And it goes on to say his private army, the RSF, have been placed at the disposal of the UAE for their efforts of maintaining a military foothold in the southern Yemen area, where they're right there mixed in with the Al-Qaeda locations, which are easy to prove according to their own maps that doesn't ever change, seeming like clearly they're working with them. I mean, there's so many provable examples that the Al-Qaeda ISIS overlap is at approximately. It's amazing. That's even shocking to this day with all of the receipts and evidence we can show. But the point, and since I say that, I'll bring up the false flag, the Al-Qaeda documentary that James Corbett put together, which is amazing, easy to prove. And if you want to question whether that's a provable example, I recommend you watch even just one of those. It'll blow your mind. And it says, and were notably involved in working with the Sudanese military in ousting the former president in 2019. So not only is Israel backing the most extreme element and most extreme leader and using that group with the UAE, which is clearly on Israel's side, to fight in Yemen, which is another destabilized and starving country, they're also worked barely behind the scenes to democracy? No, to remove a person who was in power voted in by their people. Almost immediately after the ouster of the President Bashir in 2019, who they were responsible for removing, Hamedi's ties to the Israeli intelligence services began emerging. It was revealed that later that year, he personally signed a $6 million deal with a Canadian lobbying firm. Well, why? Canadian doesn't matter, right, Ryan? Well, founded by a former Israeli intelligence operative, Ari Ben Menashe. The RSF had also repeatedly expressed its support for normalization with Israel. Now, the whole important overlap of these UN 8200 backed companies, we need to see that is not some tangential thing that is clearly connected to the larger agenda. Hamedi has also held a number of meetings with Israeli intelligence and is viewed as a favorable candidate to General al-Burhan due to him being easier to sway and control due to his well-established foreign ties and dependency on the black market gold trade for maintaining revenue flow. So he's a criminal, so we can manipulate a criminal. You see how this works? Now it says Hamedi met with Israeli intelligence officers at least 2 times that we can prove between June 2021 and May 2022 alone. And the links are in there from corporate media. Bolstering the notion that Israel favors the warlord Hamedi is an investigative report put together by Haaretz in May 2022, which confirmed that a jet taxied, quote, high-end surveillance technology made in the European Union with the potential to tip the balance of power in the Sudan to Hamedi in Sudan. Just like we see with what's going on with the U.S. funding Israel, or see Israel and the U.S. funding Azov movement, they are doing this on purpose. And they are backing the baddies, the bad guys, the people that are committing genocide. It says the Predator technology belonged to the Intellexa Consortium, which is a parent company of Cytrox, owned and founded by former Israeli intelligence officer Tal Dillian. Pretty simple. Now, here's the article. Flight of the Predator, jet linked to Israeli spyware tycoon, brings surveillance tech from the EU to notorious Sudanese militia. Now, it says, while Tal Dillian has now been targeted by U.S. sanctions, which is hilarious, over international human rights violations and abuses carried out with the technology provided by his companies, he's being dealt with as an individual. They fail. Like, nowhere was there a mention of his ties to the Israeli government. So think about how dumb this is. So the Israeli government is using this guy and this company to send these weapons to the Sudan for their interest and God knows what else, while the U.S. government saying him because he's a human rights abuser. For the technology and how it was used, and they refuse to highlight the immediate direct connection to the government, a government which is using that same technology to send to bad people in the Sudan, all of which is provable. I just think it's hilariously stupid that this stuff doesn't get talked about, but we know why. Criminals, corporate media are liars. They're passive. They do what they're told. There's another example here, by the way, in 2017, as another overlap of the same thing, where these companies basically they're claiming are separate or the same, ultimately turned out to be the same company. They were just trying to use a shell game to hide what they were doing. The headline was how Israel invested in spyware at the heart of the Greek scandal. Surprise, surprise. Zionists are all over the place in their manipulations. It ends by saying, so an Israeli state-run weapons company invested in a project run by Israeli nationals, including an ex-intelligence, ex in quotes, in my opinion, ex-intelligence officer in the Israeli military. This project then handed over technology to Sudan's Hamedi that had the potential to tip the balance of power in his favor. Again, the RSF and Hamedi, who are by the U.S. and anybody else will tell you right now, are extreme criminals committing massive human rights violations. And right to this very moment, you can prove that both of them are actually supporting this group. Despite the U.S. saying they're standing with the Sudanese military, I think currently in this conversation, their actions prove otherwise. And Israel is still very clearly supporting the RSF. It says, while Tel Aviv is demonstrably connected to the RSF, it does still maintain connections with the Sudanese military as well, as does the United Arab Emirates. It says, in fact, Abu Dhabi has pledged large sums to Sudan, including $3 billion in aid, along with their ally Saudi Arabia, $500 million of which was designated to be deposited in the Sudanese central bank, of course. The thinking here is to ensure that no matter what the result is of the civil war that they've created, exploited and driven into reality, Israel and the United States and their Gulf allies will win regardless and pursue their normalization agenda. So you can see how this is the game of making sure that whatever ultimately happens, you can get what you want. But if you take it all at face objectively, it's obvious the slant is the RSF, and historically, overwhelmingly obvious. So let's just say for some reason they shifted sides and start backing the other side. It's still their responsibility. They still created this by doing what they've been doing. This is not a unique story, guys. And it's not going to, and again, I'll highlight some of these other ones we've discussed. Oh, and here's this. This is get that in there for you to read. The Secret History of Al-Qaeda. This was actually our watch along for the 3 parts that we did with Corbett and Brock West, but it's important to watch. I'll include this one for you as well about Rwanda. And this, sorry, I just forgot to add these and the B'Tselem article. So here is an article I think you should make sure, or actually it was an interview between Robert and I back in 2020. The steal of the century, playing on the deal of the century, Trump called that ridiculous thing that never even happened really, or rather Israel just pretended it did and they just took more of the land that they were illegally taking. And it says steal of the century and normalizing an openly violent ethno-state. Very contentious to say that back then, even though it was real. Just take a quick second for those that support Trump and think about the whole deal of the century game. That all supposedly happened, right? What's the argument? Oh, Palestinians wouldn't let it happen. That's the same thing here every time. When you look at the actual deal, all it did was solidify. I mean, compare it right now to even some of the things you're talking about right now, even over the ridiculous ceasefire game they're playing. All they did was write down the occupation and all the things they're doing and just call it something else. Pretend like they had some kind of autonomy when they very clearly did not. That's why they didn't accept it like every other time, because it's a game. They put poison pills in these agreements, as Netanyahu himself has put it, in order to make sure that they don't do it, so they can name them for the same thing with the ceasefire conversation we're going to have in a minute. Here's that article from Haaretz. You can check out for yourself. Now, here's a couple of these older ones, just I showed before, from 2023. The U.S. is heavily involved. The Western media omit this. The newer one from 2024, the U.S. and Israeli hand in Sudan's horrifying civil war. And then this one I just randomly saw right last minute before we were getting going live, a show we did from 2018. U.S.-backed child soldiers in Yemen. Surprise, surprise, right? And the point is they overlap from this Sudan conversation. We just talked about this. This is the Hamedi Sudan child soldier overlap. And we just showed you the UAE is using these groups to fight in Yemen, which the United States and Israel are all completely backing. I mean, it's so crazy, the overlap to all of this. Child soldiers, it's verifiable. Or like using children to mine for their diamonds in Congo, which Israel is completely immersed in. It's wild. It doesn't take much to actually recognize that they're in the wrong in pretty much everything they're doing. It just takes the courage to be able to stand against the attacks that will come after you point that out. Now, to start in this conversation, this segment in regard to Israel, I want to start with important things. This one is a clip that I was going to play about what she's saying in her kind of journey of understanding this. Now, there's plenty of things in there I'm going to point out that I don't agree with. But this is an important point to realize, that just because this is where the two-party illusion is so effective at stopping people, like with the, they've got pink hair and a mask, so we should ignore what's going on with these protests. Consider all angles of this, but recognize that just because somebody may have a different opinion about other dynamics, and maybe those are very important in regard to when that dynamic is discussed, but recognize that we all are arguing and discussing the genocide, the murder of children, and what we're trying to stop, and the Zionist infiltration of all of this. So we should be able to see common ground with anybody if we're all talking about the same thing, regardless of whether they think something else elsewhere, while considering that maybe using this as a ploy to manipulate you elsewhere. Obviously, just like the U.S. government and everybody else is doing right now, or had been doing before we got here. But still recognize that the truth about what's going on in Gaza is self-evident. Now, I'm going to play this clip for you. It's about 6 minutes. I want to make sure you hear this. And then we're going to talk about some things that are happening that are kind of just blowing up this conversation, whether it's the UN reports or a lot of different things. Israelis fleeing the country. It's obvious that they have completely lost this and lost control. But let's start with this clip, because this, I think, is why people like this are seeing it. Oh, look at that. Instagram censored our show every day.
Crystal clear when I tell you this, I do not give a damn. I used to be really embarrassed to admit this, but prior to October 7th, I knew nothing about what was going on. Like most Americans, when things are out of sight, they're out of mind. I remember being in high school on September 11th watching live the Twin Towers being attacked and never really questioning why they did that. But all I had ever heard about people in the Middle East is that they hate us because of our freedom, because of our religion, and that they're all terrorists, and that's why they attacked us. Because of that lie and all of the propaganda that we are fed, anytime that I would see a person wearing a turban, I had instant fear. Instantly thought they are a terrorist. And that is because that is what we are taught. And it's the same thing in the documentary Israelism. Those children are completely brainwashed. One of the Jewish girls in the documentary, her parents had saved all of her classwork from when she was a child. You can see from that age, they are fed lies. Like this right here. This is from when she was a child, and they told them that all of it is Israel. When some of them would be curious and ask, so nobody lived here prior to us? Their response that they would get is that there were some people that lived there, but they never really built anything for themselves. During the summertime, they would have what we call summer school or summer camp. They would quite literally train these children how to be in the army. When they turned 18, they had this mindset like, yes, we are going to go fight for our people and fight for our land. When some of them got to where they were going, they saw things that they were never taught about. They were appalled, and they felt extremely deceived because all they had to do was look around and they saw what the hell was going on. When I was watching that documentary and they were interviewing these Zionists, they all had the same talking points. Same ones that we hear now, all of the time. Like I said earlier, October 7th, I had no idea what was going on. But unlike young Michelle, the first thing that I asked myself was, why would they do that? That's when I started doing research, and I couldn't believe what the fuck I was reading. Initially, when reading those things, that is a hard pill to swallow. Again, we are not taught any of those things. It was a very scary thing to talk about, especially on a larger platform, because I was very unbiased going into this. Again, I didn't know what was happening. But from what I had been learning, it seemed pretty clear who was in the right and who was in the wrong. 75 years prior to October 7th. There's another big problem is that people think that all of this just started October 7th, and that is not the case. So I started to talk about it a little bit on my platform and where my stance was so far. My inbox, full of Zionists. Oh, it's very complicated. You're just uneducated. You're being anti-Semitic. Every message was saying that I was just missing this big piece to the puzzle. And again, I wanted to truly understand what was going on. I messaged one of the people back asking to talk and let me know, educate me. What puzzle piece am I missing? I was on FaceTime for 3 hours with a woman, a Zionist, who lives in Israel. All she kept bringing up was October 7th and hostages. And I said, yes, I think that is horrible. Like, I don't agree with innocent lives being lost. And then I said to her, well, what about the Nakba? Because that is something that I had just learned about. Her response to me was, that's in the past. We can't worry about things that's in the past. We can't change that. She was insisting that I hated Jewish people. And I told her, I said, Miss, I have only ever sympathized with Jewish people based off of what their family members had gone through. I said to her, but there is a difference between Judaism and being a Zionist. She told me I was anti-Semitic for that. And I said, well, actually, a Jewish friend of mine was the one who told me that. And her response to me was, well, they have internalized anti-Semitism. Nothing I said was correct unless I agreed with her. And now, 8 months into this, it's still the same shit.
Internalized. I mean, I guess that's just another way of saying self-hating Jew, or, like you don't understand that you're wrong. So, you're just not allowed to disagree, despite the facts.
There is no missing puzzle piece. We are seeing it for what it is. The Israeli government and Zionists tell us a lot of things. The Palestinians, they show us right here through our phones. This right here is something that has never happened before. We are watching these things happen in real time. And even though we are all seeing these things happening with our own eyes, our government still continues to lie to us. Now in America alone, you have millions of people that are like, wait a minute, what? Because here in America, we are spoon-fed one-sided propaganda bullshit. Now that we are actually seeing these things happening, what are they doing? They're not allowing journalists to be on the front lines. We want to try to ban the social media apps that we get so much information from. Seeing is believing, and just like those people in the documentary, they had no idea until they saw what was happening with their own eyes, and they wanted nothing to do with it. Like I said earlier, these Zionists have the same talking points. None of it ever changes with any of them. Unless you agree with them and stand with Israel, you are a terrorist sympathizer, you support Hamas, you're anti-Semitic, and you hate Jewish people. And here in America, there are so many brainwashed people. And I do my best to give them grace because, again, what they are saying is what we are taught. They don't know any better. But just like Zionists, they all have the same talking points. The fact that I'm a woman and that I'm gay, automatically, first thing they said, do you know what they would do to you over there? They would throw you off a building. They would be in complete control of you. They want to acknowledge that, but they don't want to acknowledge any of the hate crimes that happen here in America. Horrible things that have been done to people within the gay community here in America all of a sudden just fucking vanishes. They don't want to acknowledge any of that, because look what the terrorists will do to you. Completely oblivious to the fact that we have domestic terrorism here. Oh, why don't you go over there and see what kind of rights you have as a woman?
See, so obviously some points there, like up until that point, I feel like she, at least appeared to me like you're coming from sort of a two-party illusion perspective, right? But then of course you bring in the idea of domestic terrorism, which obviously, whether it's racism or people that might act in violence. Those things exist anywhere. But the domestic terrorism agenda is wildly weaponized. Sort of like any number of the conversations we're seeing that overlap with the same kind of agendas. And that's aimed at all sides, seemingly. But, even the idea of like hate crimes and so on, it's obvious to show you that people act in violence against people motivated by any number of things. But I just think it's very important that we're careful about feeling like there's some kind of a massive problem around them without recognizing that there's a lot that's politicized and manipulated. But again, you guys can decide for yourselves. But either way, regardless of what things you don't agree with, we all, I think, have to realize that everyone's going through this kind of evolution of thought. And I argue that it's a perfect moment for anybody, people I argue that believe that we can see through the illusion of it all to help them see the bigger side of the conversation. Right. And I think that's important to think about, and again, there will always be things that people disagree on, you like talking about 9/11 and realizing that your government was involved, and then you'll get deviated by one of the points within it. There's always something. And I think it's important to not let those points no matter how important you may think they are, as long as we're all generally seeing the same problem, that we don't let that derail the conversation. Unity in regard to the people against their government is paramount. I mean, even that statement is taken as some kind of like a threat or something. It's the foundation of our Constitution, guys. The idea that as peoples of the countries, we have the right to dictate whether or not they're doing the right thing, whether they're going in the right direction, whether they should exist at all. That's my point about the beginning conversation about they're not the one they're created a dynamic or a perception that they're the ones doling out what we're allowed to do, and it's just not the way this works. That's why I think that's important. So back to her clip.
As our government here in the United States is actively taking away women's rights to have control over their own bodies.
Right. Again, so like the point about abortion and so on, I flat disagree with that. Right. I think that what they're doing in regard to, the important part about that, I'm trying to remember exactly where that was going, where, the conversation at the time where, again, the idea that they, like the Republicans essentially like removed the ability. I don't agree with that. I think that was wildly manipulated, misrepresented in every possible way. But that's, not the same point applies. That whether or not you think she's wrong on some of these points, the larger point applies.
That's fine. We're not going to talk and acknowledge that one because, over there, terrorists. I understand 100% that it is.
Let me say this, though. I think the point about it all is that whether you agree with the point she's making about what you're not seeing, the point ultimately is whatever you personally think is important is not being acknowledged because they're saying, that, look over there, or you're the problem as a terrorist. Like, I think that's the bigger point.
It's a hard pill to swallow to think that your government and everything that you know about your country is a fucking lie. Trust me, learning these things, learning the facts, it hurts. We are seeing this happen with our own eyes. How do some of you still not believe it?
And I think an important point there as well is a lot, mostly from the Republican side of the conversation. You get this argument that highlighting that this country is broken, right? That and it's not about specifically the government, but the country itself as well, because of what the government is doing, is not an attack on the country, right? It's the idea that they turn this into like you're somehow anti-American for highlighting that they're lying to you, that they're acting in interest of other countries. Which is, by the way, exactly what they would argue if you're pointing at China, right? It's just so interesting that the game becomes that you're anti-American if you're trying to fix the problems in the way that they don't want you to, so that's an important thing to think about.
Zionism is a cult, textbook definition. And saying that does not make me anti-Semitic. I keep being told the hostages. Yes, the IOF has now rescued 7 of those hostages. Would you like to know how many of those hostages they have killed due to their carpet bombing?
I believe the number is 70, but I think it's really hard to verify.
Did you know that Hamas has released 150 of those hostages? Of course not, because mainstream media does not tell you those things, and some of you just refuse to watch anything that's actually factual, because those things are just too hard to watch. You're right. It is very uncomfortable, but guess what? We do not deserve to be comfortable. Educate yourselves on what is happening now and what has been happening for almost 80 years. People in the Middle East are not all terrorists. That is the first thing that you need to unlearn. They're human beings just like you and me. And if what is happening to them was happening to you, you would want the world to fight for you too.
I was trying to miss the TikTok sign. But, I think that's important, right? One of the things I'm kind of consistently trying to highlight is that we need to be able to look past differing opinions. This idea that we're supposed to, look, and I'm one of the first that will highlight the weaponization of things just like that. But this because, and there's actually, that's funny, overlaps with that conversation I was highlighting before. Just because there are people that have said the bad thing or people that have weaponized that thing does not then mean that should be disregarded. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that's very important to think about, is that's one of the ways they keep us divided. So I think this is important. And regardless of the fact that you may disagree on some of the points, we need to see where we align, guys. We need to start finding common ground as opposed to constantly disregarding every circle with a small deviation to what you think the truth should be. Again, they may be dishonest. That's always possible. Factor that in and keep that on guard, but realize that first and foremost, you should be trying to bridge these gaps, not push everybody away. That is how they keep us divided and distracted and broken. Now, here's another very important one. Dmitry Leskaris pointed this out. He's a lawyer and journalist. When we see an op-ed like this in the Jerusalem Post, we can be sure that Israel is in deep, deep trouble. Israeli Brigadier General Yitzhak Brick writes, quote, "One clear and certain fact, which I affirm based on the facts, is that the IDF cannot win this war against Hamas, and certainly not against Hezbollah. I believe this not because we do not want to win, but simply because we cannot." And don't forget, Haaretz already wrote this article. Like, I think a month ago, they came out saying Israel has already lost. The army, it goes on, is small and weak, with no surplus of forces. In this situation, every day the war continues, our situation worsens. Currently, the IDF and the country are heading towards internal collapse. The war cabinet leading the war in Gaza, in both the political and military ranks, refuses to acknowledge this harsh reality that it is responsible for. Its members have only one daily goal: to continue the fight at all costs, as it guarantees their political positions. Very short-sighted. I mean, the definition of it, meaning that that can't possibly be sustainable. And they know that when it stops, they lose. That's ridiculous. I guess they're maybe hoping for some irrational, larger action, which really does terrify me. It says, unfortunately, the failure brought upon the people of Israel. That's why we keep highlighting the Zionist government is the problem for every Jewish people, Israeli people, Americans, Christians, everybody. The failure brought upon the people of Israel and their continued fight without consideration for or rational thought is leading to the eventual collapse of the country. They must be stopped. He's talking about their government. They are leading the people of Israel like sheep to the slaughter. Think about that statement. The country's salvation is not their priority, but rather the salvation of themselves and their survival in power. This is really important. I mean, this is the article. You can read it for yourself. The current war cabinet is leading the people of Israel into the abyss. That is wild. The point, this is a general, Israeli Brigadier General Yitzhak Brick in Jerusalem Post, very slanted. So my point is that they recognize this, guys, and now there are people that are central in the power structure that are like, whoa, like, and probably don't care about Palestinian life, but are just like, it's this is the point about the larger part, right? Whether or not they're invested in the agenda, they're at least have enough. They're what's that word? They can see far enough down the road that they're recognizing, well, if we keep down this path, we're going to lose everything. So what's the point of maintaining this, even if I believe in it, if I know that tomorrow I won't even have this position, I might end up in prison? I mean, it's basic. And so my point is, it goes back to either people that are so extreme, so sociopathic, borderline psychopathic, that they're, obsessed with prophetic directions, or like Netanyahu, who knows whether or not this ever happened, he was about to go to jail. So these are desperate people or fanatics. And this is where we're going. And their own people see it. And then your government, who are either compromised by these fanatics and desperate people or are part of it, are pushing it forward. And you could even make an argument that it's for their interest, that they think doing this will gain them power somehow, also at the expense of Palestinians and Americans and everybody else. Now, here is a really crazy one. Haaretz, this is from today, I believe. No, excuse me, the 10th. Quote, "I can't breathe. The Israelis escaping war to set up home in Thailand." Now, you could argue it's war, or you could argue it's them running from a sinking ship, or that they just, a lot of these are the people that have migrated to take illegal territory, and now the moment it gets a little bit too tough, they're like, oh, I got to get out of here, showing you what it always really was, settler colonialism. The Israelis escaping the war to set up home in Thailand. It says, since the Gaza war broke out, more and more Israelis choose to move far away from to Thailand. It says, quote, "I'm not bothered by the moral question of not fighting in Israel right now." The idea that they don't feel they should have to fight for their country. Clearly, it's not the same as other, it's obvious what these things show us. They're all leaving. They've lost the war. Not all, but a lot of them. It just shows you something is broken. Now, Mohammed Shihada highlights one of the most important developments in the UN reports, and there's a few of them I'm going to show you, which utterly destroys and dismantles what they've been pushing forward. Now, of course, the UN is Hamas, they say, which I don't know if anybody who's stupid enough to fall for that kind of... Now, the idea that the UN could be compromised or the UN itself is not what it appears to be. I mean, I myself make these arguments. But to pretend that a 30,000 strong group that is funded by Israel, that exists in one location inside of an open air prison, is somehow in control of the UN, or that they all just are Hamas, And that yet and with nothing to back that up, but their irrational statements to anybody that would buy that or go forward with that, they're children. So right now, look at all the ones like Michael Rappaport and the rest that have been screaming dumb things like that and ask yourself how anybody like that is given any clout in this world. Here's what the UN report found, and this is from June 12th. UN finds, and the report's right here, by the way, so it's all very clear, and this is from the 10th. And here's the title. Detailed findings on the military operations and attacks carried out in the occupied Palestinian territories. Yes, they are occupied from the 7th of October to December 31st, just up until December. It's wildly damning. He says, systematic Israeli sexual violence against Gazan women, children, and men, rape, torture, sexual violence, women being stripped down to their underwear and sexually harassed while males' relatives were forced to watch, female soldiers forced boys to dance semi-naked and film them while laughing. Now, you can read about a lot of this stuff. IDF soldiers sexually harassing minor girls in front of their male relatives, forcing women at gunpoint to strip down to their underwear, some getting groped and touched. And of course, there is very clear evidence of actual rape that's been highlighted by the United Nations. Women who are beaten, abused, detained for days. And we know what happens to these people that are detained. Emaciated, starved, some end up in detention for years, decades. Getting fed dry rice, having their hands amputated because their bounds are too tight. IDF soldiers are robbing all their valuables, deliberately destroying graffiti, the house. I mean, this is a whole big report about what they're doing, their war crimes in Gaza, what they're doing to individuals, boys and men disproportionately sexually assaulted by the IDF in Gaza, boys and men. This includes sexual harassment, sexual humiliation, abuse, public nudity, forced stripping. This one from the Squirrel. This is from one that was published, that was completed in February 19, 2024. UN experts appalled by reported human rights violations against Palestinian women and girls. The commission documented many incidents in which they systematically targeted and subjected Palestinians to SGBV online and in person. I think that's an acronym for the sexual. I forget what it was. It's the overlapping sexual abuse, including through forced public nudity, forced public stripping, sexualized torture and abuse, sexualized humiliation and harassment. These incidents took place during ground operations. So this is just people out. This isn't like in detention. These are people that are being cornered in a house somewhere in Gaza and being sexually abused, raped. Civilian homes. Sexual acts carried out by force, including under threats of intimidation. Disgusting. And there's a lot. You should take the time to read all this. The point is, all of this we've already discussed, whether it goes back 75 years or just since October 7th. And all of it's been backed up by other UN reports, human rights groups. I bring these up every time, but it's so frustrating to me that these things are not addressed by most people. And this is just the ones about torture. There's a lot of these. Oh, this is the wrong one. There it is. This talks about rape and torture, horrifying cases of torture and degrading treatment of the people that are detained. This is Amnesty International, November 8th, 2023. There's the report for yourself if you want to look at it. And here, this is Motessem A. Abdul, the journalist that we've highlighted recently, who's highlighting just a quick breakdown, which we're going to save the time of going through all the documents, but they're all linked in here. You can look at it for yourself. And here's one of the other ones from June 12th. And this actually, I'll wait to show you this one because he makes a point about it right here. So here's the quick overview and summary. Easy to look at. Of course, they're Hamas, so disregard, apparently. What they show you, same as Owen Jones told you, even their own video didn't show, no evidence of sexual violence, which has clearly been dismantled by this point by the Times, New York Times, everybody. Separately. The Times in the UK, the New York Times, just completely Haaretz. Breaking this stuff down is complete fabrication at this point. No orders from Hamas to commit sexual violence. Now, that's not to say that some random Palestinian didn't commit a crime, right? The point is that it needs to be explicit, and the crimes that were leveled at Hamas and used to kill innocent people in Gaza, it's not what's happening. Israel, quote, lied about sexual violence. That's one of the things they found. And even Pramila Patten said this multiple times. They were lying about the claims they were making. Systemic sexual and gender-based violence is part of the occupation force's standard, quote, operating procedures. Systemic sexual and gender-based violence. Yeah, one of the accusations truly are admissions, aren't they? Sexual violence against Palestinians is inextricably linked to the occupation. The occupation systematically targets and subjects Palestinians to sexualized torture, abuse, forced public stripping, humiliation, and rape, all of which are in the reports. Now, of course, question it. Don't blindly take it because the UN says. The point is, we've had so much evidence to this point, this just confirms what we've already been proving. Hamza M. Saeed highlights two key lines from the UN report, that's this one from the 12th, which goes over both Israeli authorities and Palestinian armed groups. And it says, the two key lines he's highlighting, the commission found Israel likely used the Hannibal Directive. Oops, that's quite the big find, isn't it? Here, I'll just do this. Oops. I don't think this. Oh, that's right. This isn't the full report. So the full report is in, the link is in there. This is directly from the report itself, from bullet point 36. The commission also verified information indicating that in at least two other cases, ISF had likely applied the Hannibal Directive, resulting in the killing of up to 14 Israeli civilians. And this says the frequency, prevalence, and severity of sexual and gender-based crimes perpetuated against Palestinians since the 7th of October across the occupation areas indicate that specific forms of the sexual violence are part of their operating procedures. That's what he was highlighting before. Pretty wild. Read them all for yourself. Now, all they seem to be able to do with how lost this is, while people are fleeing the country, while their own media is highlighting that they've lost, while their own general is speaking up and saying, we all know we've lost. This is all just about them maintaining power as long as they can. Well, what do they have? Nothing but lies. Lies and propaganda, through which everybody currently sees. This is another very obvious one, and this is the classic propagandist, Ananya Naftali, who's been caught lying so many times it's embarrassing. Here he is again. This is the original flag of Palestine from 1939, he says. Next time you see pro-Palestine protesters, ask them why they don't hold the correct flag. Oh yeah, that seems legitimate, doesn't it? From this old Hebrew book? Well, gee, let's check that. And here's what's funny about this. Nobody should blindly believe what a fact check says. Do your own due diligence, guys, and it's easy to back this up. But what I think I wanted to highlight is hilarious to me. I said, oops, their own systems of information control working against them. And I mean Zionist or anybody controlling information. They will, I always say that because I know how people want to make this into what they, he's talking about Jewish people. No, I'm actually not. The guy, it says this guy lies more than he breathes, which I agree with. I mean, I said it. Of course I agree with, which I mean. The point is the fact check on Reuters, Palestinian official flag in 1939 did not show a Star of David. And you can read it all for yourself. It's very clear. And they go over how it's an obvious manipulation. And it's all, it's just, they just don't care. They don't care that it's this easy to see. They're just desperate. And here's another one. And actually, somebody just shared something with me. Let me see if this was a change. Oh, okay. It looks like Independent Review did her own little breakdown of this video. Let me grab that while I'm playing this for you. So this is something that was put out by Stop Zionist Hate. So in this, what they're doing is highlighting Zionism as a problem. What they're showing you is this woman at a group called American Zionist Movement simply saying there's no such thing as a Palestinian. I mean, that's how dumb this is. We're at a point, this is these old, what I've been jokingly calling loomer lies. She used to push reason I say that is a debate that I used to laugh about between Loomer and George Galloway, where he just rips her apart. It was a long time ago. And her claim was, they're all terrorists and there's no such, the Palestine never existed, like these classic lies. And he just ripped her apart. That's why I say that, just so you know, Loomer lies. But the point is that that's one of these classic old things that just that nobody believes this anymore. Not even they know it's not true. Anyone with a brain can look and see that's not true. And yet here we go again, pushing these same desperate lies because why not? We're losing, right? But let me play this clip for you. It's very short. Oh, actually, I didn't look like I grabbed it. It's really short anyway. It just says, she just says, there's no such thing as a Palestinian. It's only 10 seconds long. She says, why are we using the word Palestinian?
No such thing as a Palestinian.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a Palestinian person. Like, what's crazy about that is, like, you could argue there's no country, which isn't true. But Isn't the idea that the whole game with today, you identify as what you believe? Like, so what if they just decided we were Palestinians because that's what we identify with? So clearly those people who say they're Palestinians exist. Or are you some kind of like schizophrenic who are arguing that we're all seeing things that aren't there? It's embarrassing they're even making these arguments. So let me grab this one from Independent Review, and I'll play that for you since it includes both of these. And then I'm going to play the clip from Golda Meir, because that's obviously, that is perfect. It'll show you both. The clip from Golda Meir, which I played many times, is important. And now that whole interview is worth seeing because she says plenty of other things that are also very much on the side of Zionism in Israel, because that's what she was. But what's important to see is that in that, she admits very clearly that she was a Palestinian, and yes, that was Palestine.
Using the word Palestinian. There's no such thing as a Palestinian person.
God, how stupid.
What was all this area before the First World War? When Britain got the mandate over Palestine, what was Palestine then? Palestine was then the area between the Mediterranean and the Iraqi border.
You say there is no such thing as a
East
Palestinian?
and West Bank, no. East and West Bank was Palestine. I'm a Palestinian.
I mean, it's just very clear. Here, I'll include this. This is his link down here, the Independent Review, so check that out. That's where it plays both. And it's the bottom line is Palestine obviously existed. Now, there's obviously nuance to the conversation from both sides, but the idea that we pretend like that's not the case, well, this is so, and she, by the way, she's, as I said, well, here, Israel's fourth prime minister and one of its founding members claims otherwise. And I tagged her, of course, the woman who said that. Another lies. I just want to include this, and this applies to all of the things we've been talking about around the different bombings and massacres. This one was just put out by Haaretz. Remember, this was about the Rafah bombing right after the ceasefire that they pretended didn't happen, the third one ago, where Haaretz has highlighted the army said that they tried to make sure there were no civilians in these barracks, rather in these tents and everything that was in Rafah. It seems that no check was made regarding the presence of civilians. I mean, that's Haaretz for you. Satellite shows the attack in which dozens were killed in Rafah was aimed at a dense complex of barracks. And what they're saying is that we didn't check to see if they claim we're going for this one, but they didn't check to see if the other ones around it were full of any, and they didn't care. And they knew this would kill these other locations. It was a big old bomb that killed the point is obvious that they aren't concerning themselves with civilians. I don't even know why we need to make that point anymore. It's so obvious that even based on what they have been saying, they lied about taking precautions to not harm civilians in their recent massacre in Rafah. Only two ways to take it. They either didn't care or they wanted to kill them. And here is the breakdown from Euromed Human Rights Group from up to June 11th, or June 12th, actually. Number is now 45,223 that have been killed. That's 15,620 children, 10,173 women, and 41,000 civilians. Now, I actually don't know whether they break that down as Hamas or that means that they were in some other capacity. But either way, as I've said, I find it near impossible that they haven't killed some Hamas members. But I also think it's hilarious and crazy that Israel hasn't shown any. And I think that's because they just can't prove it and they don't know. But here is the numbers are staggering, guys. 146 journalists killed, 467 schools damaged, 2,590 industrial facilities destroyed, 361 health facilities destroyed, 1,126 health professionals. You realize they haven't proven a single example that any of these were Hamas members. I find it impossible there's not somebody, but that means every one of them they're all war crimes. Everything you're looking at here. Almost 700 mosques destroyed. It's just unreal that anybody pretends like this is something okay. Now, this I added right before we went live. I actually haven't even got to watch more than like the first little bit of it, but you won't be surprised by this. Piers Morgan talking to RFK Jr. Censor ban highlights RFK Jr. maintains his position of not supporting a ceasefire. Right now, June, I imagine this was the last, it has to have been the last so many days. Still, he compares Israel's actions to those of the allies during World War II. I mean, guys, he's pulling right Lindsey Graham, Netanyahu talking points. This is just sad. It's just, I mean, as much as I'm, the one that it's always like, I don't trust anybody, it's still a letdown. Like with Trump or anybody else, as much as I'm like, I question it, I don't believe it, I still am, like I always say, I hope you're right. I hope to God that you're right about any of them. And then it's still a letdown when it's clear. I'm like, well, yep, exactly what I sadly expected. It says, in the same way the Allies didn't stop, even though millions of German civilians are being killed, he doesn't believe Israel should stop, even though thousands of Palestinian civilians are being killed. Kennedy seems to believe, Censored Man writes, that Israel can carry out as much death and destruction as they wish until every Hamas member is eliminated. In simpler terms, he supports the complete destruction of Gaza. And realize that how exactly do you create a ceasefire with Hamas? Well, your objective is we'll destroy Hamas, otherwise we won't stop. It takes a special kind of willful ignorance to not acknowledge that transparent contradiction, but it's there. Now, let's talk about the ceasefire because this is absurd. I mean, reasonably briefly, there's other points I want to make around this, but just it's the same thing. It's never stopped. I mean, there's 2 days that have gone by since I covered this, and guess what? It's the same ridiculous cycle that has not gone away. But this makes it very clear. This is from today. This is from Times of Israel. Negotiations stuck. They just updated right there. Negotiations stuck on Hamas demand for Israeli upfront commitment to permanent truce. That's really the bulk of this. And all of these pretend, they have these different amendments that we don't agree with. I showed you this already. The only things they're doing is confirming, or rather, I'll read what it says here, is that they're not changing anything. They're just simply going, hold on, as we already showed you, what you offer does not hold them legally accountable for their actions. Only Hamas is required to say, yes, we have to do. Israel is not doing that. So just like we said on stage 2, they'll just not agree to a permanent ceasefire. And isn't that what they're saying? We will not have a stop to this until we just Hamas. So it's all self-evident right now. They're not going to do it. So they're going to make sure when the time comes, after they get their hostage back, that they go, wait, no, we have to go after you first, like we said. And what does that amount to? More killing of civilians and Hamas and everything else they've been doing. So the point comes down is they go, well, I can see that. So yes, it is a amendment to the thing that was not correct in the first place, based on what they already knew was demanded by everybody other than Israel, a ceasefire. They go, we want to confirm that they are going to be held to committed to that ceasefire from the beginning. And that's supposed to be a breaking of the deal for asking them to be forced to commit to what they claim they're going to commit to. Like, isn't that the most ridiculous thing in the world? All that really proves to you is that they never actually planned on committing to the ceasefire, which, by the way, is so obvious it makes my teeth hurt. But let's read these things. The primary issue complicating negotiations, this is Times of Israel, by the way, is that Hamas is demanding an Israeli guarantee up front that it will agree to a permanent ceasefire. Pretty simple. 2 officials familiar with the matter told them, and that's supposed to be Hamas's fault, that you're simply going, we don't believe Israel's going to hold to it, so we want guarantees. And they go, how dare you? That's what's happening. The Israeli proposal submitted on May 27th stopped short of this. Of course it did. Instead, requiring the sides to first agree to a 6-week truce. So this whole game and the lies, the bullet points that Biden and the rest put out that say ceasefire permanent in the first bullet point, they're lying to you. Because the actual back and forth, according to Hamas and Israel, is this, where it's a short stop, where they, by the way, will probably still keep murdering and bombing in the West Bank like they did last time. It says, during which some hostages would be released, and the sides would hold talks on a permanent ceasefire to begin in phase 2. So that's clearly not what we're talking about. Not what the U.S. says Israel supposedly agreed with, which is the point we'll get to in a second, which they still have not, despite Blinken screaming the same thing over and over. It says the phase would reportedly see the release of more hostages, phase 2, the establishment of a permanent ceasefire, and a full Israeli withdrawal. That's supposedly. Then it says the third phase, which, by the way, I don't even agree with that framing. When you read the phase 2 part of it, it clearly puts off the actual agreement until phase 3. And it says the third phase would include the release of bodies of hostages and agreements on the reconstruction of Gaza. Israel is also expected, as part of the deal, to release a large number of Palestinian security prisoners, including many who are serving life terms for terror offenses, which, by the way, when you look into them, is not what they sound like. I mean, it's almost ubiquitous. The vast majority of the ones they have locked up for decades are some of these people that are there under claims without any real trial or any charge. Many of them are throwing rocks or being adjacent to something. I mean, and, I'm not even saying that there aren't people that you could argue were committing offenses. But let's remember, we're talking about an illegally occupied territory when these people are acting against military targets. But going forward, not every one of them, obviously, but I'm talking about many of the points in there that they just conflate with terrorism. But it says Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly asserted that Israel will not agree to a deal that ends the war before they destroy Hamas. I mean, even the writer of this article has to be like, well, that's pretty stupid because clearly they're pretending over here is the United States says they agree already, but then they say we won't until they're destroyed. So do I have to say it again? How exactly do you, even in stage 3, come to a ceasefire agreement with a group that you're demanding has to be gone by the time you have that agreement? I mean, we should all be laughing about this. This is so obvious, and they think we're this stupid. This is the Times of Israel, guys. It's not hard to recognize this is what they're saying. And it says he has claimed that the not fully publicized Israeli proposal, Netanyahu has claimed, would allow Israel to do that. But portions that were leaked contradict that. So he's lying to you guys. And the point is he's trying to stress this to act like he's in agreement in hopes that something keeps going and he can just point back and say, yeah, I told you I was going to keep doing this. But they're not shy about that. It's not possible for the agreement to have this clause that says you can destroy the group that you're supposed to have a ceasefire with. That's pretty obvious. That's contradictory. It says Hamas is making the demand for a commitment to that ceasefire up front because it rightly fears that Netanyahu will only implement phase 1 of the deal. That's what's going to happen, which would see the release of the remaining living female, elderly, and sick hostages before finding a pretext to resume the fighting, which is exactly what happened last time. Now, there's a point about this that's going to probably blow your mind, or Orwell shared with me, about the Bibas family that Gantz had to say. And guess what? He clearly insinuates that they know they're dead and that they're hiding that. It's exactly what I have been talking about. Now, yes, it's Hamas's fault that they were taken in the first place, and that was a crime, and they should all still be held accountable for that. But they have been killed by IDF bombings, according to their father. And even Gantz seems to suggest the same thing. And my point in saying that is last time, the pause, that's what happened. They, at least as far as I can read it all, and I think I'm right on this, they were trying to return their bodies. And they were so hell-bent on using them for this ongoing propaganda campaign that they just said, they just pretended there was a violation. They went right back to bombing and it didn't happen. Very telling. That's my opinion, but I think it adds up. Now, in addition, it says Lebanon's Al-Akbar outlet reported that Hamas is demanding that the IDF start its withdrawal of the Gaza Strip on day 1. Which I don't understand why, if the whole point is you're agreeing to do these things, why is it so difficult for them to agree to start right away? Because it's clear to me that they never intended to do any of them. They were going to go, oop, thing, no longer. You know, you did that, and we can't now, it's your fault, just like every other time. Now it says, with the key Salah al-Din and al-Rashid highways, the army facilities in Nert Sarim, like we're moving from these locations, and the Philadelphia route from along the Gaza, or rather Egypt and Gaza border, and the Rafah crossing, vacated by the 7th day. So my point is you have 7 days to make that happen. So you have plenty of time to make sure that they're meeting their obligations too. The point is they didn't want to do any of this until they got what they wanted first. I don't know why that's not the most childish and obvious thing in the world. It says, if Israel doesn't commit to a full withdrawal from Gaza by the 7th day, the release of the hostages would stop. That seems like a pretty equal and fair conversation, especially since Israel's pretending they've already agreed with the general concept of this. Now they're just pretending that this somehow violates everything and they're breaking the deal. Why? By demanding that you do what you said you were going to do? That's pretty much it. Now, I was going to put this at the end, but I think this is pretty funny. I think it's right here. Oh, hold on. I went too far. Shoot. Oh, well, I'll come back to it. There's one I was going to, Nikki. Oh, here it is. Perfect. So I think it's hilarious. So as this is happening, right? And it says, Israeli officials tell me Israel received on the 11th Hamas's response. And then it says Hamas rejected the proposal, which is not even remotely what happened, but all these liars do that, which laid out by President Biden. He lied. They all lied, or at least they just regurgitated what some Israeli outlet told them or something like that. But this is what I laugh about. And this is like Nikki Haley is such a cartoon. Like, I don't get why she doesn't realize that she's like this vessel for nonsensical neocon talking points. She goes, you can't negotiate with terrorists. You mean while you're negotiating with terrorists? Don't think you thought that one through. How embarrassing these people are. I mean, you're literally in talks with a group that you're calling terrorists, and you're saying you can't negotiate with them. So what's your argument? Clearly, she could simply be saying we should just be murdering everybody. We should go right back to that. That's probably what she's actually doing, signing bombs to kill children, right? But I just think that's such a stupid statement. Well, their policy, like politically, Nikki Haley and the rest, is that we should be dealing and coming to an agreement for the bench of Israel. It's just so funny. It's like in the beginning when Netanyahu was like, we can't deal with terrorists. We're going to keep going after Hamas. And then they got pressured. And then they made a deal. And all the people online were going, we're not going to make a deal with them. And then they made a pause, but it's like, well, okay, so there was a deal. So you were lying or you didn't understand. It's just all talking points, guys, one after another. Next on this article, continuing, it says a Hamas source told Haaretz, quote, the amendments that were submitted, which, by the way, again, weren't really amendments. They were minor in the sense of this saying, well, we need guarantees they're going to actually do what they've already agreed to, or that you claim they've agreed to, but wasn't official and in writing. That's just the U.S. relaying that they said that. But it says the amendments that were submitted are intended to ensure that the withdrawal and ceasefire be established in the first phase and that Israel will not be able to evade the implementation of all stages of the deal and return to fighting. Again, that's the most level-headed reaction. I mean, it's obvious. And it says Hamas also demands that it will be allowed to select a list. Now, this, you could argue, would be something that would be unsavory to Israel. But it's the same, all the conversation, it changes is they just want to be able to have a say in who gets removed from the prisons from Israel. But the removal of people from their prisons was always in the deal. They demand to be allowed to select a list of 100 Palestinians serving long sentences to be released from their prisons as part of the deal. Just like Israel wants to be able to dictate what's happening from their people coming back. It's the same damn thing. The only game is they go, well, you're all terrorists, so that's a problem, I guess. But you've already agreed to release these people. And many of the longest serving people, as we keep showing you, are people that are arrested without even being charged. People that come out and it turns out, oh, look, he's a lawyer. And now he's lost 400, 100 pounds. I'll show you these in a second. Now, this goes on to say, Hamas objected to the Israeli documents' exclusion of that demand, as well as its stipulation. Okay, before I go forward, like we just showed, so they're arguing that they rejected the proposal. Which they didn't. They simply were, as like I showed you after the Security Council vote, they were supposed to then mediate. Not that it was just said and done. One group had to say, yes, that's the game they're playing. They go back and forth. Is it good? Okay, we'll go back to them. Is it good? Okay. That always happens every time. So when they go, well, here we need to do this, and it wasn't even real change, it's just saying we need to guarantee they're going to say yes. They rejected it, is how it gets framed in Israeli media. My point is, Hamas objected to Israel's document exclusion of that demand. So Israel did the same thing. Is anybody reporting Israel refuses the deal? No, because that's one-sided game they're playing. But when Israel removes something or says we're not okay with that, and they remove it and send it to Hamas, that's the same game. It's only just one-sided when they highlight one of them doing it as a removal or a denial. But it says, as well as the stipulation that no prisoners with more than 15 years left on their sentences be released. So they objected to their exclusion of that. So I just think that's very interesting what they're choosing to fixate on. I think it's all about making sure no matter what, that this doesn't come to an end. That's my opinion. Then it says, in a statement Wednesday, Hamas claimed it had shown, quote, full positivity in efforts to reach a ceasefire agreement with Israel, which I agree with, actually. It's not an endorsement of Hamas. It's about the basic reality of how this has gone back and forth that anybody who's not dishonest can very clearly acknowledge. It further urged the U.S. to direct its pressure against Israel to accept a deal, leading to a permanent ceasefire. You know, what they pretend they want. Instead, they go, Hamas better do everything. They better accept it while they've already done it, and we're waiting on Israel. All right, they apply the pressure to them to accept, or rather simply uphold what they've already claimed they're going to do. Hamas said that while U.S. officials have said Israel has accepted the deal outlined by Biden, it says, quote, we have not heard any Israeli official confirm this acceptance. Because it hasn't happened, guys. It says Netanyahu's office has not released an on-record reply, but a statement was issued by an anonymous Israeli official who said the group's response has, quote, changed all of the main and most meaningful parameters. That's what they just said. What they did, which simply was like, you got to make sure you do it. And I need to be able to pick these. That's changing everything. Well, maybe because the whole point was they were never intending to do it. And that does change it for them. I think that's what that says, amounting to a rejection of the proposal. So all they did is when they asked that they demand that they actually do what they're claiming they're going to do, they claimed that was a rejection of the proposal. That's how dishonest this whole thing is. Then it says, quote, the talks will continue now through the Qatari and Egyptian envoys in coordination with the U.S. to see if an agreement can be reached. And it keeps going. Around and around we go with this ridiculous game. Well, people keep getting killed. Well, children keep getting starving to death. That's the reality. I was gonna say one thing. Oh, that's right. It was about this. The point being, they're lying about the agreement and everything else. Assad Ral points out, saying there's nothing to indicate that Israel has accepted the ceasefire at all. This was on the 11th. In fact, and by the way, they've been saying it on the 10th. Remember the UN representative for the U.S., I forget her name, Greenfield, I forget. She said, they've accepted it. It's on Hamas. Then Blinken went on this tour saying it over and over. Meanwhile, Israel themselves were going, we didn't accept it. And they said, we will not end this if we can't destroy Hamas. And Blinken's going, they agreed to a ceasefire with Hamas. It's just stupid. But it says Israel stated repeatedly that they do not want a ceasefire until their objectives are achieved. That's clear. I just made that point. The Biden's admin's gaslighting is working, though, because I do feel like she's going insane, she says. I get it. This is made to feel ridiculous and confusing, but it's actually not that confusing. It's about making sure that everybody just checks out so they can keep blaming it on Hamas. But you can see all the articles. Israel only agreed to discuss the matter, not to end the war. Israel officials, description of the truce does not accurate. Israel vows to press on in Gaza. Like, how dumb this is. But here's one of the most important points. Here's little Mikey Rappaport saying, Hamas just rejected the deal on the 11th, which didn't happen. And by the way, he is citing the article we just went through. So he's just stupid. Oops. But here's the point. I said, maybe your cross-eyed stare made you miss it. Here, let me help you. Here's Al Jazeera. Mohammed El Masri, a professor of media studies in Qatar, one of the entities that's mediating, says the U.S. has been very misleading about the ceasefire plan. He says, no matter how many times Blinken says it, it's not going to make it true. Israel has not accepted anything. It's amazing how bad this all is. I mean, again, this is highlighting the earlier point we made about why this is desperation. They're losing control everywhere. And I think this is just, what else are you going to do? I mean, quite frankly, I could come up with something I think is much better, even being dishonest. I don't know why they can't seem to factor in some new action, but either way, I think this is all they know how to do. No matter how many times he says it, they didn't agree to anything. Here we are on the 12th. Blinken goes right back to it, right? Just nonstop. He says Hamas could have answered to Biden's proposal with a single word, yes, but they proposed changes.
A deal was on the table that was virtually identical to the proposal that Hamas put forward on May the 6th.
It was identical. I mean, this is the game that Matt Miller played, right? I mean, it's the same thing they keep doing. And then when Israel offers something new, they pretend it's on Hamas. They don't identify that Israel did the same game. Like when they do it, you don't go, Israel could have accepted it, and they said no. Why not? Isn't that the same thing?
A deal that the entire world is behind.
It's not true.
A deal Israel's accepted.
Nope, not true.
And Hamas could have answered with a single word, yes. Instead, Hamas waited nearly 2 weeks.
That's also not true, by the way. They keep playing this game where right in the beginning, more than once, they have accepted this deal.
Propose more changes, a number of which go beyond positions that had previously taken and accepted.
No, not even remotely. I mean, that's how embarrassing this is that's why they won't show this. They won't show the Security Council. They won't really show anything. They just keep making statements about things you're not allowed to look at. That's why they're doing it. Because if this was something that you got to print a document for, they wouldn't be able to make these things up. But it says Voice for Justice says it's all so tiresome. Benjamin Netanyahu says no permanent ceasefire until Hamas destroyed. It's the same thing. But here's the important part of this. Hold on. Let me make sure I didn't. Oh, well, I mean, first, before I move to the next point, it's the same idea, right? So they simply asked for them to be held accountable to what they say they're going to do. Why in the world that would be a deviation that mixes I think it just, I don't need to say this. It's obvious that Blinken and the U.S. government are desperately on the side of Israel. And they are acting in the interest of Israel at the expense of the ceasefire they pretend they want, which is why they vetoed this every time, which is why they clearly act against it. Here's what Elon Levy had to say. And this just simply shows you how, by default, dishonest these people are. He literally writes this on the 12th. Hamas isn't offering a permanent ceasefire. What? He says it's offering a temporary pause. I think he may have just misread an article or something. How dumb is this? That's why I saved it, just in case he deletes it. He says it's offering a temporary pause till it feels ready to perpetuate another massacre. Otherwise, why not say peace? Because they're not the one that wrote the deal, stupid. But what's funny about this is that this is, I mean, you could argue he's misunderstanding, or he's just trying to make what he thinks is some kind of pithy point about how where they claim ceasefire, but they're just going to go right back to murdering Jews the moment they can. It's just ridiculous. It's not even remotely what's happening. It's not even remotely what they argue they're going to do. It's, in fact, exactly what Israel's going to do, which is yet again the projection of exactly what they're thinking while they claim the other side's doing it. But the point is, they're explicitly offering a permanent ceasefire. That's exactly what they're calling for. And I simply just said, one of the only things Hamas has been consistently asking for is a permanent ceasefire. Pretty much the only thing Israel says it wants is no end to the war until Hamas is destroyed. And here is this intellectual infant stating the exact opposite on both counts. Yeah, shocking. He's lying. Big surprise. And again, you can't negotiate, except that's what they're doing, though. Now, here's the important points about the many times before this. Same thing. They could have answered with a simple word, yes. She follows up and saying Israel could have said yes 11 times, but said no. And we just talked about this with Richie Allen. I sent this to him as well. He just tweeted it out because people push back on this all the time. It's been provable from the first week, and I've made this point many times. Here it is yet again, directly from Times of Israel. The article, no doubt, Netanyahu preventing hostage deal, charges ex-spokesman on the Families Forum, the people that are representing the families of the hostages, for crying out loud. This is from April 26, 2024. It says, there is no doubt that Netanyahu is preventing a deal. Netanyahu knows that if he goes to elections at this time, he won't be able to form a new government, and he is motivated by cold political considerations. It's also the fact that if he knows that this is over, and especially if he's no longer government, he is going to prison. His own people despised him before October 7th. They were protesting about the judicial reforms and the way they were trying to change. I mean, they don't want him in power. So he's more desperate than the rest of them. But here's the other one. It says, we later found out that Hamas had offered on October 9th and October 10th, 9th or 10th, to release all civilian hostages, all of them, simply in exchange for an IDF offer to not enter the Strip. That's it. Now think about that for a second. And we've shown you this many times. The breakdown of like 11, it's almost like 13 now, 14 times now that they've offered something that amounted to all of their people back, and they simply said no. And didn't see Blinken scream about that. But think about what they're asking there. All civilian hostages for simply not going into the Strip. And instead they said no. And remember, I keep pointing out, and I'll probably be able to pull this up right now. Well, there's at least there's this one works. This is a CBC News video. Defeating Hamas is priority. Everything else is secondary, Israel says. This was right at the beginning. This was 8 months ago. The first week, they just were very blatant about this. This hostages don't come first. Now they can't say that because their own people are rioting in the streets, but your government won't show you that. The point is that they were clear. We're going to go after Hamas. The hostages can come later. And in the process, killed 70 plus of them, shot them in the streets, bombed them with bombs, killed the Bibas family. And this was while they had this on the table. And then they got it again. They got it multiple times in the first month. And many of them were like simple, like just don't invade and we'll give you everybody back. Like this one just says civilian. The point is it ultimately ended up more than once being, we'll give all the hostage back if you give humanitarian aid and stop the war for 6 months. Like, say, I forget the exact dynamics. I'll have to watch that video again or grab it for you. Let me see if I actually have it real quick. The point is that they refused over and over and over while pretending that they were fighting for the families. Here it is.
Here's every ceasefire deal and prisoner exchange that Hamas has offered Israel since October 7th. October 9th. Hamas offers Israel an unspecified number of women and children being held hostage in Gaza in exchange for 36 Palestinian women and children being held hostage in Israeli prisons. October 16th. A Hamas official says they'd free all Israeli captives in Gaza in exchange for 6,000 Palestinian captives in Israel.
Things like that. I'll include the video. The point is that they're talking about it in complete exchange for not even everybody back from Israel. And they refused. Because at the time, I think they thought they had the ability to push further, that the U.S. and everybody else would blindly support them, and they were wrong, at least in regard to what the people will do. Now, here's Gantz, and this is very important. This is Mondoweiss. This is from yesterday. What comes after Gantz's resignation? Here's what he says, and this is important. He says, Gantz announced his resignation after he'd given Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu an ultimatum to put forward a post-war plan in mid-May. In a televised statement, he accused Netanyahu of preventing them from winning the real victory in the war in Gaza by obstructing the decisions for his own political gain. Now, he's been quoted in radio as saying that he, for political reasons, has been refusing the hostage exchange. Here is Gantz. This is from April 29th. Back then, he was still in the government, saying he was threatening to overturn the government if their prisoner deal was blocked. And guess what? Netanyahu and the rest of them continued to block this, blaming it on Hamas. That's it. See, this is coming from the Israeli side of it, guys. You just can't get more clear than this. Here's Printer Families highlighting in Tel Aviv on December 31st, a while ago, the Israelis are pressuring the Netanyahu government to enter into the prisoner exchange agreement with Hamas. This has only gotten exponentially larger today. And I've shown you the later ones from like a couple weeks ago. Massive protest. Remember the last time that happened, they turned it down? The Israeli Jews on the street were saying, we're going to burn this down if they don't accept the deal. And they ended up starting a fire in the street, but nothing happened after that. But the point is, they don't agree. Meanwhile, they're acting like they're doing this for them. And Biden pretends that they're all on the same page. They're all lying to you. This is from NBC from March 31st. Netanyahu won't agree to hostage release deal unless it polls well for him. Israeli families say they were told this by them. I mean, it's just mind-blowing what people in the political sphere, usually the two-party illusion in this country specifically, are oblivious to. This is corporate media. This is coming directly from Israeli entities and the families in Israel. I mean, it's just mind-blowing. They don't want this deal. Meanwhile, right now, across the Republican side of this conversation, you're seeing them scream that Hamas is the one doing everything. It's all right there for you. Here is Jerusalem Post. It doesn't seem to want to load. I have it right there. There it goes. This is from Jerusalem Post. Approved a deal and then did nothing. Gantz attacks Netanyahu in rounds of interviews. This is important. I'll just show you right here. And I've been talking about this a lot, just only because I keep seeing these aggressive propagandists use this family. Again, Hamas is responsible for taking these civilians. And I'm talking about the Bibas children and anybody else that was not a military target. And they definitely should be held accountable for that. And in a part responsible for the fact that they were killed because they took them there. But the actual killing of these families was because of the indiscriminate and belligerent bombing of the Israeli government. And quite frankly, possibly because of the Hannibal Directive, which we just showed you. Even the UN report found that they did do that. And the colonel from Israel admitted this was a mass Hannibal, which, by the way, would simply continue to apply to all the people that are still held. That's what that means. So here's what he says. Israel should pay the price of a year or 2 year long ceasefire in Gaza for the return of all the hostages. Basically saying that that's what they should be doing. And that's what most every Israeli now is actually saying. Now, the National Unity faction leader who spoke following his resignation from the emergency war government on Sunday said that Israel must do whatever it takes to return the hostages, which is what the people want. Gantz, while interviewed by Khan, which is an Israeli platform, spoke about the Bibas family, who were kidnapped on October 7th and held hostage, among them Shiri and Yarden and their two children, 4-year-old Ariel and 1-year-old Kafir. We just showed you them. It was Mike Rappaport screaming about Ariel. And they know, it's public information. I post it every time underneath them, and it's been discussed by corporate media. He says, quote, I think Israel knows what happened to the members of the Bibas family. The public will know when it will be possible to verify things. That's a crazy statement. And especially because it's been such a fixture on the conversation because of the propaganda, that's pretty wild, guys. And I think what shows you, they know what's going on. And quite frankly, I think it's because they know what they're doing. And that doesn't, you could argue that maybe Gantz is a part of it. That he's saying that he didn't, that my point is that statement implies to me that they're aware either because of their belligerent bombing that they've been killed or that they were trying to. You can decide for yourselves. I'll just include these, by the way. We put this out back on January 7th. The Bibas family was killed by the IDF. As we reported, Israel is killing its own people in Gaza. And with the three they shot point blank, one 15 minutes after the other, you should have questions. The title is Israeli Captive Says Regime Forces Killed His Family in Gaza Offensive. And of course, the point is you can obviously argue that they were lying. But the bottom line is there's been so much more information that's come out. This has ultimately been confirmed. It's just shy of actually being confirmed, I would argue. And the bottom line is that every other person that has come out has confirmed what they were saying on video while they were there. Every one of them. Here's the other one. Dan Cohen just highlighting what the CBS News report had to say. And in their reporting on the deaths of the Bibas family back on November 30th, they were forced to acknowledge that they were killed by Israeli airstrikes. Now, I also included this, just a couple of the ones that popped up, just so you can, if you want to comment, you can make sure you say something or just look at the people doing it. Here's Elon Levy doing the same thing. Save the children, May 29th. Every time I'm saying, as the rest of you do, sadly, that they were killed. They know this. They don't care. Here's Aviva Klampas. Why is this night different from others? Let my people go. Bibas family. If you look overall of all the things that they've shared about the hostages, the Bibas family takes up like 50% of what they're doing. It's disgusting. It's propaganda. They're using these children knowing that they've been killed by their bombings. That's something special. This was Eli David, I believe, and he blocked me, so I can't see it. Now here is somebody posting about one of the ones that was just released. Tamir Schwartzbard says they took a man hostage, and it's actually POW or detainee since he's an IDF member, locked him in the bathroom, piled blankets on him during a heat wave, threatened to kill him multiple times, but oh my God, they made him a birthday cake. So she's actually admitting that they did make him a birthday cake, which is hilarious to me. And the point is, so this has gone from raped and tortured and possibly killed to now like, oh, they made him do dishes. They made him a cake, and they, cynically made him a cake and put blankets on him. Like again, they were taken, in this case, as a POW, and that should be scary in its own right, no matter what ultimately happens to you. No one should be diminishing that, but we have to acknowledge how crazy this is. And the point is, Noah Argamani made it clear. She said this more than once on the record that the Hamas members shielded her with their bodies from the bombings of the IDF. Now, how about you? So the idea is when they piled blankets on him, what do you think that was? This is the same thing they do every time. They take something like that and they say they make it into during a heat wave instead of the fact that it was trying to save his life from what the IDF was doing or made him a birthday cake cynically. I mean, that's pretty desperate. And they're also alive and well-fed and not dead like we're seeing in Gaza or coming out of the Israeli prisons. But as I said, this is precisely what they did not want you to hear, and that's why I think they were killing these people. Compare what she was saying to what's happening in Israeli torture prisons. As he says here, and here she is in her IDF uniform, by the way, Noah. Her statement to the public was that they were letting her go shopping twice a week under guard. I mean, trying to contort this into something it's not is disgusting. And as I said, exactly like anyone else was telling you, as they are now telling you, they were greatest fear was Israeli planes bombing them. And this guy on the record, if you read the article, as I showed you the last show, says very clearly, Israeli government should do anything, should take any offer that's put forward to take these people back. That's their obligation. That's what he said. They don't care. They're not going to do it. They're playing games right now. Now here is just two new examples of what it looks like when they come out of Israeli detention or being detained even. This is a young boy that was kidnapped by the occupation forces. Held for God knows how long. Released near the Netzarim corridor on Wednesday. He's traumatized, unable to speak. He only draws an Israeli soldier with a gun. Think about that. Doctors report he suffers from severe malnutrition. He's probably, if you think about what they do to these people, this kid is traumatized. And you think about like in some kind of therapy, right? He's drawing an Israeli gun. That's all he can do. Israeli with a gun. It really sits with you. It's things like this that just, I couldn't get this out of my head. It's horrifying what they're doing to these people, and they're laughing about it. Here is one of the most obvious examples I've seen. If it wasn't for what the opening topic, I probably would have used this for an image, and maybe I will. Palestinian Parliament President Aziz Dweik So Palestinian parliament president, 77 years old, before and after they kidnapped him, starved, tortured, and held him in an unknown location for 8 months without charge or trial. He was released. This was today. Do the sunken cheeks, hollowed eyes, and pale skin remind you of anything? This is what he looked like. For the podcast, make sure you check this out. Heavy set. Here's what he looks like now, today, released. Look at that, guys. Nobody can pretend that that makes sense. This is exactly what they're doing, if you get out alive at all. And this is not my opinion. It's backed up by the United Nations, backed up by Human Rights Watch, backed up by Amnesty International, backed up by the Israeli B'Tselem human rights group. Anybody who's honest about this can very clearly prove what we're seeing here. But all they can do is scream about blankets and birthday cakes and dishes. Now let's talk about what's happening to the children and everybody else, in fact, including their own hostages and POWs, detainees, because they're blocking aid, because of what they're pretending isn't happening. This is yet another example of this, and this just makes me sick. I actually want you to see this. I'm going to play it on the video real quick. So hold on one second. Let me grab this. So what I said is children are literally starving to death. As Elon Levy, Aviva Klampus, Oren Ostrovsky, David Collier, Michael Rappaport, Eli David, Hen Mazig, all of them, all the ones I'm highlighting here, and plenty more, and all the other overtly racist Zionist supporters are not only cheering this on, this genocide, but pretending that they're delivering more food than ever. That's what continues to happen. I just think it's important to see how often, I think we, I actually don't remember whether we played this on the last show or not. But I mean, that almost goes to speak to my point, right? That we're talking about is something that seems to be so grotesquely common that gosh, makes me so sad. Can't even watch this anymore. I mean, so 7-year-old Hanan al-Zanin passed away on the 12th due to Israeli starvation policies and malnutrition. One of many now. The number continues to increase. And all of these people here, all of them listed, you let them know what you think about them, are not only allowing this, but they're cheering it on. Now here is what Elon Levy said on that same day while that child was dying and died of starvation. He says, the whole Gaza Strip is 25 miles long. If there are food shortages in the north, you can walk 20 minutes. Let that sink in. Not only are you just blithely, casually discussing an overt famine campaign, but also just, I guess, can't do math, apparently. This person said starvation, as a journalist, starvation has returned to the north. Now, realizing this is a place that barely people are even able to see. They're not even allowing journalists in there. We know people are starving in the south, and we see what's happening there. We see people starving all over the place. So he's just simply highlighting that it's now an identifiable problem here. Everything's empty. Meat, chicken, vegetables haven't been seen for weeks now. The only available thing is flour, and it's barely available. Many kids are already malnourished, and having access to nutritious food is making them extremely weak, not having it. The North needs aid. North needs food. So he's not saying everywhere else is okay, but of course he's playing on this. So think about how grotesque it is as a person like Elon Levy who knows that people are starving all over the place and just goes, I see a perfect opportunity to manipulate people about the lie to maintain starvation. So that's what he says this. And by the way, it's not 25 minutes, you absolute horror of a person. And that's what Rich People Weekly says. Look at him just phoning it in. Is he drunk? He's literally blaming a manufactured famine on laziness. Laziness. Even though the occupation forces have set up kill zones that they can't walk through without being executed on sight. This man has lost his humanity entirely. I argue that he never had it if this is the kind of thing he's talking about. This is a psychopath. And his math is trash too, right? Exactly. It's really unnerving to think that people like this exist. Mohammed Shihada highlights, Israeli civilians burned a Palestinian baby alive with his parents, then celebrated at a wedding and chanted Ali on the grill. It's an old story, but it's real. Been confirmed 40 times over. Israeli civilians launched dozens of pogroms in the West Bank over the past 16 months. Many Israeli civilians live in stolen homes or on stolen land. Israeli civilians committed several sexual assaults against Palestinians since October 7th, documented in today's UN report. Israeli civilians voted convicted terrorists into office in the most extreme, openly fascist government in Israeli history. Even their own human rights groups, even the ADL, for crying out loud, called some of these extreme. 94% of Israeli civilians think the IDF is either using enough force or too little force in the Gaza genocide. He says, I can do this all day. Does that give a green light to kill all civilians, you genocidal maniacs? His point is, no, it does not. Despite all of that, we're still calling to not hurt civilians on any side. Here's what Israel just tweeted and then deleted, which continues to show you that even they recognize it's too far, but they know how extreme they really are. Here it is on the way back machine. We need to talk about the elephant in the room. This is their main account. Many Gazan civilians participated in the horrific events of October 7th, which, by the way, I don't see any evidence of that. That's what they keep screaming about because of what they just used in the narrative campaign around why it was okay to bomb the last one we just discussed, which wasn't al-Mawasi. It was, I think it was also Rafah? I can't remember the exact location where they used the humanitarian aid trucks and the pier and went up into the buildings. No, it's al-Nusra refugee camp. I mean, isn't that just, God, it makes him revolted by the fact that I can't even remember which genocidal action it was. Many Gazan civilians participated in the events, they say. My point was they were just pushing that narrative with their civilians in these buildings, and each side was giving a contradicting narrative about the journalist that was there was holding the three, or no, wait, the army says he was holding Noah. They were lying about everything. It's also reported that Gazan civilians held Israeli hostages captive in their homes. The world must condemn this in the strongest terms. They just put this out on the 11th. That's because they're trying to bolster the narrative that all the civilians are holding people. And what did you keep hearing? You heard people like Michael Rappaport say they're all guilty because they're holding civilians in their homes or holding Israelis in their civilian homes. These are the worst people alive. Like this is the worst of human society, guys. People like Mike and the rest of them that are pushing this on top. The point is, Owen Jones and the rest of them are calling it out. Israel has deleted this tweet, a confession of genocidal intent. It made clear Israel believes Gaza's entire population have collective guilt. The point was to diminish outrage at slaughtered civilians because they're not, quote, innocent. They even paid to make the tweet an ad, which is true. I mean, think about that for a second. I mean, at one point, they would have gotten away with this. Alan Mizrahi highlights this from Israel, because this is what you started seeing at the same time. People posting, let's have an honest conversation about, quote, civilian, in quotes, casualties. He says, you represent the absolute worst of humanity. That's what Alan said. I 100% agree. And it doesn't matter where you're from, what country, what nationality, what religion, anybody anywhere that stands with something like this, that says something like that, that is the worst, lowest. I mean, there's obviously different, we can point at a terrorist organization and say they're worse. The point is, what's it amount to? Somebody who is so disregarding of human life that they will allow things like that, take part in things like that, create things like that. So it's the same thing. There's the bottom of the barrel. He says, I'm definitely happy to ratio the heck out of this monster. Oh, and that's the other point too. You can see that he just, gets ratioed, which shows you that the world does not agree with this, or at least the majority of his own followers who he's saying it to. But he goes, but after seeing a few expressions of the same idea floated by a few different people and outlets, and knowing how Israeli psychology warfare operates, he says, I have to assume Israel's trying to do one of the two things. Again, and in thinking with my point about how they know they're failing right now. He says, one, prepare for the discoveries of post-ceasefire Gaza, which means we'll see the worst, the things that you've yet to see, right? The real bigger picture of the bodies being decayed in the street, eaten by animals. I mean, it's a horror movie. Or B, prepare for an escalation in the deliberate industrial extermination of Gaza. He says, there can be no other reason why Israeli speakers suddenly start talking about, quote, are those really civilians in sync? He says, I don't know the details of what Israel plans to do. He says, and I don't doubt such details exist in an acceptably sane sense, but I definitely hear the music. And the music is that of a total suicidal Jewish holy war. He's an Israeli Jew himself. He says, we should remember that none of Israel's decision makers is mentally fit or would be considered a normal person by the vast majority of humanity. That is so true. But that doesn't matter much. The international community needs to be warned that Israel is probably planning to deepen and expand its final solution in Gaza. Choice of words, very deliberate. Then the West Bank, and then the 1948 Israel. Oh, and it also wants war with Lebanon. And they don't care about that. They don't care because they think that as long as the U.S. keeps arming them, they can do whatever they want. But they're wrong. After a month or two of war with Lebanon and a potential intifada in the West Bank, and the IDF will barely function as a military force anymore. That's where they are now. And Israel, he says, will descend into armed societal chaos, which is borderline happening. Remember, we already saw those external groups basically say we're revolting, we're like breaking off from Israel. They've lost control of this. He says supporters of Israel are so genuinely stupid that they don't know and don't care. Now, I wouldn't say they're stupid. I think a lot of them are just crazy, genocidal, bigoted, racist. But some of them just don't see it, which is pretty hard to wrap your mind around. Now, to end, they're bombing in Al-Mawasi today, nonstop. You know, one of the other safe zones, we're told. It never stops. And they're just foregoing narratives anymore. Doesn't even matter unless something big enough happens to where somebody pays attention and then they reactively and reflexively give you some kind of a narrative. Well, Hamas was there. Or wait, no, they did it to themselves. Or maybe it was because, just whatever works. And then they circle back and they kind of just pick the best of them all, right? This is from today. No internet, no phones, no prior warning. Now the narrative is, well, we can't warn them because they'll tell Hamas. Isn't that funny how that shifted over time? Where first was we do everything we can and we warn them, we drop leaflets. Now it's like, well, we tell them, they're going to tell Hamas. It's like there's just no consistency to any of this. And all of it, from top to bottom, violates international law. No communication, no telecommunications. They cut that as well. And now the despicable Israelis are carpet bombing civilians in tents in Al-Mawasi. You know, the other location. They keep pushing them away from where they are. Then they go to bomb where they just went next. He's saying breaking, 2:30 a.m. Big massacre in Mawasi, Rafah right now. Tents are burning. Dozens of people got killed in artillery shelling and intense airstrikes and gunfire from military helicopters, quadcopters. Over and over and over. Motsam telling you that displaced people in the west of Rafah yesterday. So late yesterday into the morning of today. And still, as far as I can tell right now, that's the west of Rafah, same place, are currently subject to heavy carpet bombing. These are people that have been pushed to the edge, guys. They're literally tents on the beach at this point, and they're still bombing everybody. Or we're supposed to believe there's tunnels in the beach? Here's a clip from Al Jazeera. Israel has designated Al-Mawasi as a so-called safe zone. Safe zone. That's not a joke. And now they're bombing it.
It's about what's happening in Al-Mawasi and describe the area to us.
Well, it has been very intense in Al-Mawasi area the past couple of 20 hours. The Israeli military is pushing more west and invading the western parts of Rafah. According to eyewitnesses, there is airstrikes and artillery shelling happening, but there are also 100,000 Palestinians still in Rafah, and most of them are in this Mawasi area. This is a safe zone designated by the Israeli forces, and there has been no evacuation orders. So we have been seeing more people on Al-Rashid Street evacuating north to the middle area and to the central parts of the Gaza Strip. But again, it's very crowded in the middle area. There's no place for people to go. Schools are packed, hospitals are packed. even empty lands and agricultural area are packed with Palestinians who made makeshift camps in those areas. So Palestinians are left homeless and also helpless, being displaced a couple of times, multiple times. People are in a state of frustration and despair because it suddenly happened. The Israeli forces started attacking Rafah and the Al-Mawasi evacuation area without any further notice.
Talk to us.
Now, think about how brave it is for any of these people. You think they don't know what's going on? They know that almost 200 journalists have been killed. That's why you're seeing new faces every day, because they're being killed, guys. And yet they step up. They line up and they step because they know what they're fighting for. And they stand there and they risk their lives. They go live on the air, knowing that shows Israel where they are, and they continue to try to show you the truth. And so many of these people out there just want to call them all Hamas and blithely disregard human life. Make note of who those people are. Here is a video from Sarah Wilkinson showing the break what's going on. With no phones that work in Al-Mawasi, hours later, Palestinian relatives still don't know if their loved ones have survived the latest satanic, she calls it, Israeli massacre. Now here is what they responded with. Israel denies hitting designated safe zone. Well, that's simple as that. Game over, right? End of story. Israel said, no, we didn't do that thing that we just did. We didn't do that, even though we've done it 14 times before this that we have admitted to, right? That one is fake one, though. What do you mean? What, you didn't do it? Are you, well, here's the crazy thing. They're not even going, no, it was Hamas. They're just like, no, we deny it. So who did it then? Who's the one that dropped the missiles that only you have? Explain that for me. It's just infuriating that why even report this? The bottom line is it's evident they've been doing this over and over. Again, here is the New York Times and Haaretz investigation, or rather New York Times investigation that Haaretz covered. Israel used the most destructive bombs in the areas they designated as safe. And this goes back to the very beginning. This goes back to the very first week of this, where Egypt said on the record that they bombed the crossing, that they bombed where they were going, they bombed where they told them to go. They even bombed the aid trucks in the beginning. Remember that? They bombed them. It's so obvious what's been happening from day one. They just shifted the way they cover it. Even the media that pretend they don't see it. They denied it. Tiberius highlights this. This is effing insane. He says that, and totally, he says, pisses all over the argument that Hamas uses human shields. They've bombed everywhere. Since October, 70,000 tons of bombs have been dropped. That is twice what was dropped on Dresden, Hamburg, and London during World War II combined. So if we're going to pretend that in it, as Elon Levy wants to use in the small area we're talking about, that they've dropped more bombs twice combined than what they dropped during World War II in those locations, and we're going to pretend like they're only going after specific Hamas locations. Guys, they bombed literally the whole area. That's why you keep seeing the videos of just destruction. And then what are you seeing? Well, they're coming in with the bulldozers and they're breaking everything down. They're ripping up the streets. Right, because Hamas tunnels and stuff? No, because they are destroying Palestinian society. You don't drive a truck ripping up the streets unless you're trying to stop them from going about these areas, because they're destroying everything. So obvious. Now, lastly, here's Asal Rod highlighting a group of armed Israelis shot a Palestinian merchant in Jerusalem over the displays in his store. You turn this down, I'll read what it says. Oops. So, a group of armed Israelis shot the person there, merchant, in Jerusalem because of displays in his store, including, by the way, a Palestinian map, which I think is really the point. Stories like this, she writes, of Palestinians being terrorized simply don't even make a blip on the Western media. And here's the worst part, guys. As Cuts News highlights, an Israeli settler armed with a rifle shot that person as she was reporting, but guess what? The Israeli forces rushed in to protect the assailant instead of aiding the injured person on the ground. Doesn't that just sum it all up for you? the police, they run over and they talk to the people with the guns that are still being aimed at the Palestinians. It's just overwhelmingly obvious. And here he is. No one Palestinians are helping him. Police ran right by him. And by the way, they're not going after these people. They're standing right there. You see how this works, guys? That if you're a Palestinian, you don't exist. And the police and the occupation forces, they support the settlers and they support the random people as long as you are not a Palestinian. Well, actually, more specifically, as long as you're a Zionist Jew. But the point is that even Ethiopian Jews, not Orthodox Jews that are against the Zionists, they attack them too. It's about Zionism. But the reality is that this happens every day. That these people get shot, they get tortured, they get destabilized, they rush in the middle of the night and pull them out of their houses just to keep them in fear, as IDF members have admitted on the record. What are they supposed to turn to? Who are they supposed to go to? This is what their lives are like. And it's not just post-October 7th, guys. It's been their lives the entire time. So I'm going to end with this clip. I'm going to tell you right now, this clip is a little bit rough. As I said, I didn't really get into a lot of the most graphic stuff because I just think it's hard. But this has a little bit of that. And with children. But I think it's important to see at least just kind of a smaller compilation to see the overlap, the juxtaposition of what they're saying alongside some of these examples. So thank you for tuning in, guys. I appreciate your support as always. And I think that a lot of this is going to continue. Like I've said a couple times over the last month, that whether it's the lawfare or the censorship, it's like, I think it's like if I just stopped today and never did this again, which won't happen, I know internally that this will always be like, that the consequences in the minds of the people that think I'm doing the wrong thing will live with me forever. I mean, if I go to get a bank account somewhere, suddenly it won't happen. Or if I try to, PayPal, the rest of these things, I'm boxed out. Google products, I'm boxed out of this stuff, guys. And so that will be with me forever. And those are small things. I mean, really, if that's what I have to deal with to stop them from genociding people, sign me up, or I already am. But I think it's going to be worse than that. I think that if, especially if this continues in that direction and we can't stop where this is going, my point is that, as I've said before, if we can't stand up and risk what we have to fight for what we think is right, then what are we doing here? So I think it's important to think like that. And I'm not saying you have to. I'm not trying to obligate anybody, but I'm saying that's how I think. That's what I believe. If you believe in this and you believe this is important to stop, and whether we're talking about the genocide or what they're doing elsewhere in the world, I think that's worth risking some of our comfort. Some of what we believe is just simply what we cherish and what we believe we're fighting for. I mean, it's like anything else. Like I said last time, if you're fighting overseas for something you believe in, you're risking your very life. So maybe we should be able to risk a little bit of the things that we have every day. And I think that's what's happening. I mean, I'm losing them left and right now. So I think it's worthy of the challenge. So thank you for continuing to stand with me. And like I said before, if there's anybody out there that wants to help us fight this, I would love to stand up there and fight court. I would love to keep pushing this. And, I maybe we'll still lose. And the risk being that I lose and end up being, it'll be 100,000 plus for both sides and both lawyers' fees. And I would like to, the good thing is standing up and making this, public fight will draw attention to this stuff. I just don't have the means to do it. So I'm being forced into accepting something that I also can't afford, but I just don't know what else to do. But that has nothing to do with the fact of whether I'm going to keep doing this work. I will not stop doing this, whether it's because you guys support me or just because I believe in it. I will keep doing this, which is, I think, one of the primary aspects of what this is, to try to stop me from doing this. Don't look at the show today. I double down, man. I do not roll over. When this stuff happens, I think it's important to stand your ground, even if there are more consequences, especially if you believe that you're right. And I do. I believe what's happening here is wrong. And I hope you'll continue to stand with us. Thank you for being here. I love you all, as always. Question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Israel is fighting Hamas terrorists, not the Palestinian population. And we are doing so in full compliance with international law. The IDF is doing its utmost to minimize civilian casualties.
To win this war,
We must destroy the remaining Hamas battalions in Rafah. We will finish the job in Rafah while enabling the civilian population to get out of harm's way. We've taken measures to minimize civilian casualties that no other army has taken in history.
As I said yesterday, our military operation in Rafah, the major military operation in Rafah, should not proceed without a credible plan for ensuring the safety and support of more than 1 million people sheltering here.
They are making efforts to try to minimize civilian casualties. That does not mean, and I did not say, that they aren't still causing some, that their operations aren't still causing some. They are, and each one's tragic. Each one shouldn't happen, and we've been crystal clear about that.
אמש הנחיתי בהסכמת קבינט המלחמה לפעול ברפיח. תוך שעות כוחותינו הניפו את דגלי ישראל במעבר רפיח והורידו את דגלי החמאס. הכניסה לרפיח משרתת שני יעדי מלחמה מרכזיים: השבת חטופינו וחיסול החמאס. אנחנו כבר הוכחנו בשחרור החטופים הקודם. לחץ צבאי על החמאס הוא תנאי הכרחי להשבת חטופינו.